So I will read the public hearing matters under the Planning Act. This is a formal public meeting to consider applications under the Planning Act. If a person or a public body that would like otherwise have an ability to appeal a decision of the City of Kitchener to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make an oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kitchener before the bylaw is passed, the person or the public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. We will move on to discussion items dealing with item number 1, which is the official plan amendment of 481, 475, and 505 King Street East and 18 and 24 Cam Street South with Julu Holdings. And Mr. Bateman has a 5-minute PowerPoint presentations. Go ahead, Mr. Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, committee members, fellow staff, and citizens of Kitchener. I'm here tonight to present an official plan amendment and zone change application for a comprehensive mixed-use development to occur on lands on King Charles, Madison, and Cameron Avenue. I'm very excited tonight as these lands have been, as you're probably aware, have been vacant for probably best to over a decade now, and we've been eagerly anticipating something to occur on those lands on the east end of Kitchener. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jacqueline. I have it now. If I can just draw your attention to the first slide, I thought it'd be important to give some contextual information. The subject property is outlined in red, as you can see above there. Hopefully most people can see it. And my laser isn't working. There you go. It was working earlier today. But hopefully you can see the subject property. It's outlined in red. It's a large rectangular parcel of land with 4 street frontages. The largest frontages being on King Street in Charles, and the smaller street frontages on Cameron and Madison Avenue. It's large in terms of area. It's 0.85 hectares. And these lands have been assembled over the years to come up with one large development parcel. What's quite unique and I think important is obviously the 4 street frontages that I've mentioned, but also the fact that it's very close to our Kitchener Market. It's right adjacent to the Ion station stop, the Market station stop. And it's located right in the spine of what is termed our mixed-use corridor in Kitchener, where we've been anticipating a mixed-use comprehensive development. It's sort of the vision for the city. I thought it was important to throw in what it's looking like right now. And really this slide is simply to illustrate there's potential on this site. The buildings have been knocked down. And there's clearly opportunity to do something fabulous on this site. And I believe once I show you the plan that's being proposed, I hope you will share in that excitement as well. Here's the site plan. So I know it's a little more difficult on a 2-dimensional, but what is being proposed here is there's a larger block that encompasses the entire site. King, Charles, Cameron, and Madison, which is the podium of this development. It's 4 and 5 stories in height. It is fully activated, and what I simply mean by that is that along King Street, they have, in that 4-story podium, they have 2 stories of commercial, and then residential above, and then around the remainder of the site is residential. So these what we term active uses. So eyes on the street, way to activate the street. It's a way of engaging the pedestrian realm, as often we refer to. And then on top of that podium are 2 towers. So as you can see, there's Tower 1, and that's 14 stories in height. And then at the opposite, and that's fronting on to King and Madison, and then at the opposite corner, diagonally, is Tower 2, and it is 18 stories in height. In total, there are 488 residential units proposed, about 1,200 square meters of commercial retail, again, all along King Street, about 530 parking spaces. Yeah, it's a fairly comprehensive development. And of course, linking the two towers on top of the podium is that rather large and expansive landscaped open area atrium, and there's a pool. And what that does is it links the two towers together, so it kind of gives it a community feel to it. That's really the intent of it. I won't go into much detail because I know the consultants want to give you their take and overview of the site plan as well. Oops. Those are the notes that go with it. I forgot to mention, just before I leave it, there are two primary access points for this development. There's one off Cameron, as you can see. The other one is off Madison Avenue. Been purposely designed to, obviously, we want to keep them off King and Charles. It splits and diverts the traffic from each site. And certainly, from a transportation point of view, makes a lot of sense. So here are the latest, I guess I'll call them building elevation drawings. This is looking on King Street. That's the Cameron Street intersection. So you're looking down King Street. And many of you that may have been involved in the neighborhood information meeting that was held earlier this year, plans were rolled out for this building, and I just simply wanted to show you that it's improved immensely design-wise from that first iteration of the plan. You can clearly see the podium and how it addresses King Street. The idea being is that with the retail uses that will spill out onto the sidewalks. It's really to promote a real positive pedestrian experience. And with the towers, what's key with that is the fact that they're set back from the podium. And that's a key consideration, because the idea of setting it back from the podium is that when you are a pedestrian walking down King Street along that podium, you won't really notice the height of those buildings. You won't visibly be able to see them. So that's a real positive urban design aspect. I just wanted to mention that. And then with this development, there's public art that's being proposed, and there's that sort of that glass curtain wall at the end that you show. It's conceptual, but it will be something similar to that. It's to provide, this is a gateway location into the city at the east end, and we wanted something to reflect that gateway location, and that sort of just draws your attention to the site. And this is the view looking from the Charles Street side. So if you can see it really well, there are, I'll call them like a brownstone townhouse development, or townhouses along King Street, or on Charles Street, again, to activate the podium on that location. We really want to have small fences and access points from each unit onto Charles Street to activate that street. That's really important to us. And then you can see this one really shows the buildings. They are quite well articulated. There's a number of design elements that have been incorporated, again, since the neighborhood information meeting. And staff, we feel, is a lot of important upgrades have been made. Implementation. Any development requires an implementation. This is where planning really comes in. It requires an official plan amendment, and that's really to permit an increased floor space ratio of 7.1 from what is currently permitted under the policies of 4. And this will be achieved through a special regulation area under the mixed-use corridor designation of the King Street East Secondary Plan. So the designation is currently in place. The uses in the development, as you see, they would be allowed. It's just the amount of, I'll call it for lack of a better word, the amount of building bulk on the property is what they're proposing to increase. And that's largely driven by the podium. And that podium, because there are 4 street frontages on that podium, they've had to spread that podium across the entire site. And if you do your math, and it's 4 and 5 stories in height, there's your 4 floor space ratio in that podium itself. And that's important for planning, because that's what really makes this development to human scale and inappropriate for this property. Something we want to see. Corresponding with that, to implement this plan, the site plan that I've discussed, there's a zone change, so they're proposing to rezone the subject property from what it's an MU3 with special regs and uses currently to MU3, or a mixed-use corridor zoning with a special regulation 7.19R, and that's really to implement the building plan as I've discussed. So these things include, of course, recognizing that there's going to be an increased FSR. There's a slight increase in the amount of floor retail GFA for retail, building setbacks, parking, visitor parking requirement, and of course bonusing. As with any large scale or with any project that we do here in the city, there are a number of technical matters that the city and agency staff must consider for the evaluation process. The applicant has submitted a whole bunch of studies, and they're listed up there. I won't go into them. And these have been evaluated by staff, and we are very confident that these studies that have been submitted meet the intent of what we're looking for. We're pleased with the information to support the application, and more importantly, these studies have shown that the site development is compatible, functionable, and serviceable, and those are sort of the main tests that we have to consider under these situations. The other thing we did is we've done a public engagement. There was a letter circulation that occurred back in December of 2017. Many of whom are here this evening may have received that letter and have provided comments to me. I thank you very much for those. And then this was followed up by a neighborhood information held in early February of 2018, largely in response to the letters that I received. And I got about 14 letters. And I think generally what I heard from the community is that I think overall they were pleased to see something finally happening on this site. I think there's a recognition that it's long overdue, but there were some concerns, and I completely understand. And those are related to traffic, impact of the surrounding road network, parking. We want to make sure there's enough parking. Pedestrian safety, there was concern about students crossing at that location. Infrastructure, some around compatibility, construction impact, streetscape, and then a high level of urban design expected. And these have been, in my mind, have been appropriately addressed. They've been responded to in my planning report. You've had a chance to look at them, and I'm confident that you will feel that these adequately address these concerns. So in conclusion, in my opinion, this represents good planning. Why? Because it helps the city meet intensification goals in the planned vision for transit station areas and mixed-use corridor, which this property is part of. I mean, it conforms from a policy perspective. It conforms to the growth plan, the PPS, the region's official plan, and our official plan. All our policies and all the provincial policies speak to intensification in areas around transit station stops, and this site is ideally suited to meet those policies. And I think most importantly, or equally importantly, is the fact that the development meets the intent of the tall building guidelines. And we've spent a lot of time in dealing with those in the past. The 400 residential units will support transit unit usage. It's going to provide commercial retail employment. This is important not only in terms of having places for people to shop and can walk to. That's all part of what we want in a transit-oriented development, but also it provides additional employment opportunities for the area. It's a rental housing development. I mentioned that earlier. I think that's a good thing for the downtown. We don't have a lot of that right now. That's what Drulo specializes in, and I think specifically in the East End, this will be very helpful. And I think that what this development does is it'll provide streetscape, public art, community amenity space, affordable housing. These will all things that will benefit the community. This is what we're getting through the bonusing aspects of this development, and I think that those are very important and necessary part of this development. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bateman. We will be going with delegations next, and for those members of committee who have keyed in, I will have you in order when it comes time to questions for staff. With that, for delegations, pursuant to Council's procedural bylaw, delegations are permitted to address the committee for a maximum of 5 minutes. Our first delegation is Mr. Pierre Chauvin from MHBC Planning. Welcome, Mr. Chauvin.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of committee. I think I have a presentation. I think it's being loaded up here.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Pierre Chauvin with MHBC Planning. With me this evening is George Bekas with Julo Holdings, who's the land use manager for Julo Holdings, and also Stephanie Murdish of our office, who's been helping us throughout the way on this application. I just want to take this brief opportunity to thank your staff, in particular Brian Bateman, for marshalling this application through this process, and it hasn't been easy. It's been a lot of moving parts with this particular application, and we certainly thank the efforts from staff all around, from urban design, landscape, engineering, planning, etc. I'm going to try to quickly go through the highlights of this application. I'm not going to try to I'll emphasize certain things, but not want to reiterate some of the matters that Brian has already spoken to, but these are 2 towers, 14 and 18 stories in height, atop a 5-story, 4 to 5-story podium. We have 488 residential rental units on top of commercial retail spaces on the ground floor. And I want to emphasize that rental because unlike a lot of the recent development in downtown Kitchener, this is probably one of the largest rental properties that you've been dealing with, and I'm sure there's others coming, but unlike the condo development that is occurring, this is a rental product which is much needed for your community. We have a considerable amount of parking, 434 plus the 96 tandem spaces, so it's about 530 spaces, considerable amount of parking for the tenants, as well as the commercial uses, though that will be partitioned off within the building. Also a huge amount of indoor bicycle parking as a measure of transportation demand management measures, TDM measure, to help encourage other multi-modes of transportation. We have a number of accesses provided, pedestrian access, but vehicular access will be provided off of Cameron and Madison, as access to King and Charles are limited. Pedestrian accesses were focused for the 4 main intersections. There are a number of other pedestrian accesses internal to the building off of King Street and off of Cameron and Madison, as well as Charles, but these are we tried to identify the 4 main entrances at all 4 focal points. And in particular, and you'll see in some of the renderings, the corners of Madison and Charles and Cameron and King, we've identified those as sort of key focal points, given the LRT station on Charles and King being a gateway to the downtown. We've introduced some architectural elements into the building. This is what the proposal looked like with our initial submission. It's generally the same in terms of podium, tower, but you'll notice in the renderings we've made a number of different design changes as a result of what we heard from the public at the NIM, as well as discussions with staff. Some of those design changes, as you noted, we've included a public amenity space within the building, upwards of 700 square feet of a community space within the building. We've added, as mentioned earlier, this public art. Again, this is very conceptual at this stage, so don't get tied up on the colors of that, but it is a curtain wall on either corner of King and Cameron and Madison and Charles to identify those gateway entrances to the building as well as to the downtown. We've, at the request of staff, we tried to incorporate, or we have wrapped the entire parking structure. Believe it or not, behind that podium is parking. and we've wrapped it with residential units such that you're not looking at blank walls or windows for parking. It's all being animated. You can see on the second and third stories, and even the fourth, there are balconies and actual residential units above. So again, animating the street. We've internalized all the parking. We have committed to improving the streetscaping on all 4 frontages. And I mentioned we've incorporated those curtain walls. And we've also made a number of changes to the design and materiality of the buildings. And so this is what the finished product, and I think Brian has already shown this image along Charles Street with nice LRT trains running along Charles. To encourage or promote and support the proposed increase in density, we are recommending, and our client is committed to providing some bonusing provisions. A number of these include transportation demand measures, providing an excessive amount of indoor bicycle parking, subsidized transit passes, car share spaces, bicycle repair stations, as well as unbundling the parking. We've also committed to providing funds towards a transit shelter on King Street, as well as commitments towards affordable housing, provision of public art, and as I mentioned, a cultural space within the building, and we're also committing to doing some additional streetscaping on all 4 fringes of the building. As Brian alluded, we had completed a number of studies which staff have supported. We've incorporated a lot of the recommendations, for example, the noise, the wind study, and the shadow study, urban design, within the final design element design that's before you this evening. So in conclusion, the proposed development, and we agree with staff, that achieves the intent of the official plan and the zoning bylaw. This proposed mixed development will provide rental opportunities for a broad demographic of the city and a badly needed part of the city. And it'll provide a mix of residential and commercial uses that will provide an opportunity for people to not only live there but also work and play within the same area. And we believe that this development, with all the great design changes that have been incorporated, that we work with staff on to incorporate, will lead this development to create a landmark for your downtown. So those are my submissions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chauvin. We do have a question for you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chauvin, for showing us some additional renderings. Did I hear you say transit passes?
Yes.
So transit passes to the retail sector or to the residents living there?
That would be to the residents.
To the residents, okay. So to encourage them to use transit as opposed to parking spaces. Is that the intention?
That is the intention, yes.
Okay. That's great. That's pretty innovative and creative on your part. The other thing that I heard you say was affordable housing. A buzzword around this community quite a bit. Can you give me an understanding, is this something fully implemented through the entire project, or will you have designated floors? I mean, sometimes higher floors command a higher rental. I've been in a number of Drulo buildings, and you know, sometimes there's bigger spaces up there. Is that the intention? I mean, I know it's early days, but do you have a sense and understanding of how that's going to work?
Yes, we do. We have had discussions with some of the ward councillors on this, and we still are continuing to have those discussions. But at this time, there is what we're committing to is a financial contribution, and that would go towards sort of regional affordable housing. And there's also an offer on the table to provide a number of units within each tower. Okay. And so again, those numbers are still being worked out.
Yeah. So essentially, the height of the buildings, including the podium, are 19 and 23 stories. When I've been at some of the other Drulo buildings, those heights, and you said you've done a wind study, but maybe you can tell me if the podium is blocking some of that wind that will affect the entrances, because that's the challenges I see when I go in and out of some of the Drulo buildings that I've been in, that when there's even a slight breeze, those doors are very hard to open and hard to close, especially for seniors or people with any physical challenges.
Again, like I said, the recommendations of that wind study were taken into account. So some of the design elements with what happens is with these towers, you get a lot of downward rush, and as the wind is cutting through the building. So with the step backs in the building and the podium, that prevents a lot of that from happening. And also we've incorporated, you can't see it within the details, but within the doors, they're all recessed. There's double doors, so you're getting shelter from the elements. The whole facade of King Street does include what we call a portico, or it's a covered walkway. So again, protecting you from the elements. And so we've incorporated all these various design elements at all the entrances, and as well as in the way the towers were designed. So. Okay. Short answer, yes.
Yes. Just the orientation. There was a couple of slides maybe that might be easier if you go back, because it says that you've done a shadow study, and a shadow study is, that would be a good one, is always very critical to me, because lack of sunshine in Canada can be a really significant issue for people. So you're showing houses here to the left of this picture. What is that orientation? Is that a north, south, east, west? What orientation is that?
It's a little challenging in Kitchener because not everything's quite north. But
True. So maybe on this particular corner?
That will be north. Yeah.
So the houses are on the north side of that building?
Yes, that's correct. And so, the houses that are fronting, that would be Madison. Those are on the north side of the proposal.
Okay,
what I would call north.
Okay, so which direction in this picture? Which direction would the sun? I see, like it looks like the sun is in the far left-hand corner of this picture, but I don't know if that's a true reflection of what is happening there.
Sure. If you see the smaller homes in the forefront, the sun would be to the opposite side of that screen, behind the towers.
Behind the towers. So they would receive shadow, a significant amount of shadow during certain times of the year. Is that correct?
Again, they would receive some shadow, but again, it's measured on terms of time periods, and that changes over time. And that, as long as it's not within 2 consecutive time periods, that's generally the rule of thumb in terms of a good design. This does not result in that, this design. What we've done is located the taller tower further away to the back onto Charles, and also offset those towers to help minimize some of that shadow effect. So yes, there will be shadow in certain circumstances, but not consecutively during 2 time periods throughout all seasons.
If possible, it wasn't in our package, so I know there is one for the next DRULO application. There is shadow study. Oh, you've got some here.
So anticipating this question, we brought these along. So again, if I can get my orientation right, where the shadow is cast, that would be north, which is Madison, in the March morning period, afternoon, evening.
Okay.
Go backwards if you want.
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry. Thought I was going backwards. So that's March. We've done the same in June. Again, the sun is a little higher. Shadow effect is not as great. Evening. September. And then, of course, in December, which is one that we were going to always expect a shadow impact given the angle of the sun. That's essentially sort of the worst case. I think we only got the one time period, but most people are indoors during the winter months.
True, and I wouldn't disagree with you on that, but I think the impact of being in shadow in the winter makes it has a greater impact, I think, than in the summer when people can get out and move around and be away from the darkness of the winter and the shadows. I see I'm out of time, so I'll cue back in.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Chauvin. This is in my ward. I'm prepared to move it, but I have some questions for the delegation, for staff, and I also have an amendment, which I would, do you want that in now? Or?
The clerk can take the amendment, yes.
Thank you. Should I ask my questions now?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chauvin, you've mentioned affordable housing. Unless I'm not seeing it, there's an absence of detail on the affordable housing aspect of your bonusing. Now, you met with myself and Councillor Marsh, and I believe, if I recall correctly, you were going to donate an amount of, I think it was 125,000, is that correct, to the region in lieu of affordable housing in the actual towers?
I think the original offer was 150,000.
150,
Yeah.
sorry. And I think in that meeting you were prepared, you seemed amenable, or it was with Mr. Drullo and a few other of your staff, you're amenable to trying to come to some arrangement where a number of units in each of the towers could be affordable housing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Was it 10 in each or 5?
We had put on the table 5.
5. And we were trying for 10, yeah. So on pages, I'm sorry, I'll save that for staff. So you are, you'd be willing to look at various forms of affordable housing, even though the cash amount is the only one in the staff report. Is that correct?
I don't believe there's an amount in the staff report. I think that was in our report where we put that in, and
Yeah.
based on what the draft zoning, the city zoning had put in place. So, like I said, we're still amenable to discussing what that final figure is, whether it's units, it's a combination of units, or it's cash. And we understand the concern I think you had with respect to ensuring that that cash remains in Kitchener somehow. So.
If I could, yeah. So could you tell me what other exemptions will Drullo enjoy with this development, in addition to the development charges? What else are you doing in the project in way of bonusing to the community?
Sure. I think we are providing, as I mentioned earlier, a community space, which is going to be about 700 square feet. That'll be available for rent by any community group or organization. That was something that we heard at the neighborhood information meeting as something that was desirable. So our client had agreed to reserve a space. It's actually located off of Cameron and Madison, and my apologies. Cameron and Charles, Madison and Charles. And in addition to that, we are providing funds for a transit shelter. We are providing additional funding, upwards of $100,000 in streetscaping, not only on King Street, but on all streetscapes of the building, as well as providing a number of transportation demand measures. Let's see. I think I hit the big ones.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course the public art. So.
Okay. My time is also up, Mr. Chair. I'll click back in for other questions. Thanks, Mr. Chauvin.
Okay. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chauvin, for your presentation. Do you have an image that shows the portico more clearly? Or no?
And unfortunately, nothing. The angles that we've shown, it's hard to see. That's probably the best.
It's in behind the trees, right? No,
Yes.
And it'll be a through way where people can walk in the shade when or the shelter.
Right.
Okay. And this image shows that. Oh, let's keep it there.
Yes.
Yeah, this one shows the glass all along the 5 stories. I'm just wondering, on the opposite corner, is it the same, or is this the one piece of public art that you're...
We have a similar piece like this on the opposite corner on Charles. So not on King Street, but on Charles.
Similar, is it the same size?
It's a little, just given the size, the configuration of the building at that location, it's a little smaller.
Yeah.
But again, it's meant to be oriented towards the transit station stop. So
Oh, right,
people
okay.
can access and know that this is, identify your building, and it's an identifiable piece.
Mm-hmm.
And on this particular corner being a gateway to the downtown, that's why we chose this corner.
Okay. And you said don't get hung up on the colors because they don't really, they're not complementary maybe to the rust shades in there, and but it looks, but you will be making sure that it complements the rest of the design, right?
Absolutely. It's meant to be
Okay.
art. So,
Meant to be art. Hopefully it is art.
yeah.
All right. And then, so what are the, you also mentioned in your response a minute ago that the amenity space for the community will be available for rent, but you don't really mean that it will be charged, right? It's not a fee for, are you anticipating there would be a fee involved in accessing the amenity space?
Frankly, we haven't sorted that out in terms of, so we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet in terms of whether, if there is rent, how much that would be. So effectively, though, we are providing a space, and we'll have to work out the details in terms of that cost, if there is one.
Okay, I guess that'll be a question for staff. And what are you meaning by grade A bicycle parking?
Sorry? So
Earlier, there was a mention of one of the TDM measures is grade A bicycle parking. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, this is a different type of classification that's introduced by your new Crosby bylaw. If I'm trying to recall correctly, I think it's enclosed. It's meant to be enclosed. I'm trying to. I'll have to turn to my.
Okay,
Brian
I'll
to see
ask
if he can answer
staff to elaborate.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right, and so thank you for the meeting last week. We just to mention, if I may, a quick comment that the conversation. I had additional conversations over the weekend with an affordable housing expert, and we'll be looking to have a meeting this week to look at some more details.
Perfect. I look
Thanks.
forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go with second round of questions. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. You're obviously considering the cycling infrastructure and people who cycle. So will you, or has there been discussion around bike share, car share programming in the building as well?
That's a good question. Definitely, there is car share. There are car share spaces available as one of the TDM measures. I'm sure bicycle share could be part of that as well.
Okay, because I mean, with the close proximity to the market, it would definitely lend itself to people being able to use it. If it's in the building, they'll use it much quicker than they would if they didn't have it. Sorry, I'm just lost track here. The timeline for start and completion, what are you looking at?
Well, again, we were trying to, as one of the councillors mentioned, we are within a DC exemption or area that is subject to the DC exemption, provided that we get shoring permits prior to March of next year. So that's what we're targeting, actually well before that. So as soon as we have our approvals, we're still trying to finalize site plan approval details, but as soon as we have those, we will be moving ahead with construction.
So you're hoping spring of 2019 with a completion date of what would it take roughly? 2 years?
I'll have to turn to George.
George Begas from Blue Holdings, Financial Development. It'll probably take a good 4 years to complete the project from start to finish. And we intend to begin construction March of 2019.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beckus, for that. And that's what brings me to my next question, because as I was reading the comments from the citizens in the community, they've just gone through quite a lengthy construction process with the LRT, and I noted that there were concerns around conditions of at least a view of the conditions of their house before the pile. I would imagine you'll have to use pilings to shore up the buildings. There'll be a lot of dust, a lot of noise. There may be definitely implications for these houses with all of that heavy machinery in there. Is this something that you have plans to do, is to go around and do site inspections of the houses in that area?
And I'd have to defer, if you don't mind, to George, if he's more knowledgeable in terms of the construction protocol, so if you don't mind. Yeah, if you can come on.
George, do you mind coming up to the podium, please?
Through the chair to Ms. Fernandez's question. So we will have to do shoring on all four corners of the site, so the whole site will need shoring. We'll be going through the building division and I've submitted a foundation permit today, actually, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves so we can meet the deadlines for the DC exemption. Now, unless building asks for a pre and post report on the conditions of the houses surrounding our site, because they're across the street from us with a good distance. We usually don't prepare a report.
Okay, I can understand that, but I have some construction happening in my ward where it's a significant distance from some of the existing housing, and they're still finding impacts on their foundations, on their drywall. These houses are a little bit older. Hopefully they've settled into the ground really well now, and that shaking is not going to impact them. But I would hope that we would at least speak to the residents and take some pictures and see what conditions their houses are in before we start some heavy machinery in that area.
Through the chair, we don't disagree. If you want to make that a condition of site plan to do a pre and post, we don't have a problem with that. We've done it in Woodstock. We're currently building two 12-story apartment buildings. We had to do shoring along that site too as well. And Oxford County has their townhouses next to us, and it was a condition of the site development agreement that we had to do a pre and post. So again, we don't have an issue of doing one. They are older houses, so I'm sure there's damage now, so it would be good to know where we're getting into.
Yeah, I think it would be, and so I'll speak to that as an amendment to the motion later, I guess, at the appropriate time. One more quick question. This is really unique for Drulo to be doing this. Historically, you've had a less than stellar urban design, and it's nice to see that you're reaching and being more creative. The amount of concrete in that site will create a heat island effect. And I know that standard procedure is, your small stock of trees who take some significant time to create a proper amount of shade. Would it be a reasonable expectation for us to say, during that landscaping, to put in trees that have a little bit greater girth, a little bit greater tree canopy, so that you can create that feeling, that walkability that is there on a more mature street? And I know it's been a really awful looking site for a while, so you're going to be doing an improvement.
Well, through the chair, we are going through and doing an extensive landscape plan. Now, there's a lot of services that are in the ground on all four corners. The region's told us already along Charles Street, we're not allowed to put any trees along there, so there'll be some low-lying shrubs closer to the building. As far as King Street, Madison, and and Cameron, we will be putting street trees in, again, to a certain extent. We'll go as big as we can, but again, it depends on the type of services that we encounter. We've gone through to UCC, and we're coordinating with MHBC, their landscape planner, as far as doing those landscape pods. So we're trying to give as much as we can. The portico along King Street is... we've only got so much room from where the portico is to the back of curb, so we're trying to manipulate that area and beautify it as much as we can.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. Councillor Etherington.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair. Before my question, or a couple of questions actually, I wanted to put it on record that as Ward Council, I'm very pleased to see this development, as I believe it's an attractive, important entrance to the east end of the city, and I'm delighted that it's rental. So, well, actually, we have both Mr. Beekes and Mr. Chauvin up here. My question would be, without getting into the detail, I think it was you, Mr. Beekes, could you give me an example of what you did in relation to affordable housing? I believe you mentioned in Sarnia. Just quickly, so that the rest of council can share that.
Yes, through the chair. We were in a program with the city of Sarnia where we did affordable housing, where the tenant would pay 60% of the rent. Again, it was towards geared incomes. And the city of Sarnia was paying the rest of the rent. I think they were, I don't want to put a price to it, I don't remember off the top of my head, but they were lower income families basically, so the rents were subsidized renting, $800, $900 a month for the units.
Thank you. And that just shows that it's possible. Appreciating that you don't want your project delayed. It'll be at council next Monday. I understand you just told Councillor Marsh that you're willing to meet again to talk about that example or ways that you could provide that kind of housing.
Yes, through the chair, we're willing to meet again, whether it's this week before the council on Monday, and we can, finalize, confirm the number of units per building, and whether we do a combination of the financial contribution. That was $125,000, just for the record, and we were thinking of doing 5 units as well. 5 and 5 in each building. So that would be that was the extra that we thought we would do as far as for an addition, because we don't know what the region's going to do with that money. I guess the city doesn't have any control of that. So that being said, or we can not do the contribution and maybe provide some extra units for each building. That's something we'll have to sit down and discuss and see what the numbers are. And
that's great.
Those units
and
are.
Mr. Chair, the amendment that I gave to the clerk relates directly to that suggestion. So.
And we'll look at that when we're done with the questions with staff.
And thank you very much for those answers.
We do have another question, Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks, and just a very, very quick one. But before I do, I too want to thank you for the level of work that's gone into this. I know when we first met, one of the things that I had talked about in our meeting was the desire to really see this be a kind of building that serves as a gateway into the downtown, and it's come a long way from that original concept. And for what it's worth, I actually kind of like those colors. They match our DTK awesome colors. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder. We'll let other people figure that out at the end of the day. One thing, just in terms of some of the TDM stuff that you're doing, are you also, and maybe this is a requirement we have through our site plan process, but are you also looking at putting in some charging stations for your tenants and so on?
Through the chair, yes, we are looking at doing that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's all the questions we have for you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next delegation, Ms. Christine Stocky.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
Members of Council, thank you for having me. Thank you to Mr. Bateman, too, who took the time last week to meet with me to review some of the plans. As a lifetime Kitchener resident and a longtime resident of downtown Kitchener, I am full support of development of this area. I think it's much needed. I'm very cognizant of the need for rental units in our area. It's important, so it's good to know that that's going to be part of this plan. I do have several concerns about inadequate parking, snow removal, and traffic calming and safety with regard to students at Cameron Heights High School. With respect to the parking, you're being asked to consider changing from 1.6 spots per unit to 0.8 spots per unit, per residential unit. I see this as a significant change. It's about half, with the expectation that residents are going to be using public transit. There's limited consideration for low-income housing. I know who you're marketing to for the rest of the building. And these are people who will walk, who will ride their bikes to work, who will use public transit. But these are people that still own cars. It's a myth to suggest that just in Kitchener, but in Waterloo, in Europe, anywhere, with this sort of plan for intensified density in the downtown core, that people just won't have cars. So I remain concerned that the idea of responsible growth is still considered with respect to parking. I live at 101 Cameron Street North. I was just outside of the letter writing area, so I didn't receive advance notice of the development. I wasn't aware of a lot of the details until just recently. In my neighborhood, there's constantly cars parked on the streets. They're there all day and all night. They're cars that belong to residents of my neighborhood, but there's also people that work downtown that park along streets in my neighborhood. With this many new residents, there's greater pressure on available street parking. It will have an impact on people in my neighborhood. With respect to snow removal, I wonder if there's any plans for enhanced snow removal in this development, not just around the 4 streets that are being considered, but within the neighborhood and beyond. This is a neighborhood that has small boulevards. Like I said, there's cars parked on the street all the time. These narrow streets become even narrower and almost impassable in the winter months. I'm suggesting consideration of not just pushing snow to the side, but removing the snow and enhanced ongoing maintenance during the winter months. With respect to safety and traffic calming, this development is going next door to a large secondary school where hundreds of teenagers walk to school every morning and early every afternoon. The fact that there's a signaled crosswalk that's planned, I think, is responsible. However, I wonder if there's been consideration put forward to having no left-hand turns onto Cameron Street for the safety of the young people, but also to ensure that vehicular traffic continues to move. The fact that Weber Street is undergoing construction right now, cars that turn left off of King Street onto any of the side streets pose enormous problems with backups even now. So with increased residents and increased business and customer traffic and increased cars coming and going, the thought of such traffic calming measures could help traffic to keep moving and ensure the safety of these students as well, especially with some of those perhaps fewer left-hand turns going on at the areas where they cross most often. So in summary, in order to support responsible growth and issues that remain real for those residents like myself who have chosen to live here, love living downtown Kitchener, I would suggest you question supporting the change from 1.6 spots per unit to 0.84. I feel that's inadequate for the residential units that are going in there. I'd also ask you to consider requiring enhanced snow removal throughout the summer months, not just in those four-street radius, but throughout the neighborhood. But also consider limiting left-hand turns onto Cameron Street from either Charles Street or from King Street, trying to promote the safety of Cameron Heights students and keeping cars moving along that corridor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We do have some questions for you. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks, and thanks for coming in, Christine. And then raising some of the issues. Some of the issues, particularly the last two around snow removal and the left-hand turn, aren't directly related to that, but we can certainly, have staff refer those to staff and have them look at them. Just earlier today, we were in fact dealing with some sidewalk snow removal pilots in different parts of the city. And there'll be a whole public consultation process as part of that. So I would encourage you, as the year goes on and we get into that, for the neighborhoods to participate in that process and bring about some of the issues and concerns that you're talking about. And on the left-hand turn, whether it's an issue now or potentially might be in the future, that we can regularly work with, either in our case or with the region, to look at whether or not maybe that's something that might be considered at just rush hour times or things like that, outside of sort of the planning process for this. But I just wanted to touch on those two.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Yaneski.
Just one question of a request that you made right at the end there regarding parking, that you have the parking revised from 1.6 to 0.48 or something?
Decimal 8.4.
I'm sorry?
Decimal 8.4.
Decimal 8.4.
I mean, that's part of the application, as I understand it, that they're seeking an amendment from 1.6 parking spaces to 0.84 in terms of the density.
So what do you want?
Somewhere in between that. I feel that that's essentially having the number of parking spots. The people that this development is marketing towards, those are my friends and my colleagues, people that I work with, and they are green. They are committed to using public transit and cycling to work, but they all own cars. So the thought that there's fewer than one parking spot per unit is astonishing to me. I would see one per unit as a viable middle ground.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Taki. We have no further questions for you. Questions for staff? I will key in Councillor Fernandez.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we've got an understanding about the timeline for the start and completion. And unfortunately, I did not write what Mr. Becca said about was it the pillar? I'm not sure what I said. I maybe needed to put forward an amendment regarding the shoring up of underground. And he said, yes, he would be amenable to whatever that was. Did you write that down, Mr. Bateman? Because I did not.
Yeah, through the chair. It's the pre and post construction impact report, basically.
Right, pre and post, thank you. Nothing to do with pillar at all. Pillar and post is what I was thinking, but it was pre and post. Thank you. Do I need to make that as an amendment, or is that amendment to the motion today, or is that something that you can include in the recommendations?
I think it's something that we definitely can take back at staff level. I mean, we still need to do the site plan approval process. I think we do need to have a conversation with our building folks to make sure that that's appropriate, and if they feel it is, we can certainly incorporate that within the site plan approval as a condition.
Okay, because I think...
Thank you. Just on that, I just want to be totally clear. The idea of doing something like this is currently something that's delegated to staff, so it would be outside of our normal process to be tying site plan conditions to zone change. I just want or an official plan amendment and zone change application. I just want some clarity on that before we start talking about things like trees and everything else we might be seeing.
And through the chair, yeah, those, Councilor Davey, are site plan related issues. So those are normally outside of a zone change. Yeah, we are seeking land use approval at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. I'm not quite sure where Councillor Davey was going with the question related to my questions, but if he wants to provide some clarity, I just feel like I've been sidetracked here a little bit.
The question is, your line of question is out of scope of what the application is being applied for, which is a zone change, and you're quoting site plan.
Okay, but the applicant was comfortable with my question, so why would we not be comfortable with me making the question to staff?
Okay. Again, this is a process that if we now get into staff territory, unless staff want to comment on it, Mr. Bernard.
Yes. So in the past, we've actually brought to council's attention that through the site plan process, we sometimes have to weigh competing things that weren't discussed during this evening. And we would actually have to come back to council, which for a process which is otherwise a staff delegated approval process. So our preference in these types of situations is actually just to take the direction to do our very best to achieve these objectives. And we actually have the cooperation of the applicant guaranteed here. But until we actually weigh it against all of the other elements that we have to achieve through the site plan approval process, it would be more appropriate to actually just take that direction to try and achieve that through the site plan approval process.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. I think I get it. Sorry. I just think it's good to be open and transparent in a conversation that everybody's sitting here and talking about at the same time. And that, you know what, I'm going to queue out because I need to regroup on my questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. When we're making demands on any developer, I always want to try to balance that situation with what the city is giving the developer or any developer in way of incentives. And so I wanted to ask Mr. Bateman or our planning staff a little more about those exemptions. For example, the first one, the largest one, I would assume, is the development charges we are forgiving on this development. Do we have any estimate of the amount of money involved in that, Mr. Bateman?
Through the chair, I don't have an exact figure. I'm understanding it's close to around $8 million. Mr. Beekes might have a better idea of that. I'm sure they've factored that into their performance.
I'm sorry, that was $8 million?
That's my understanding. I think he would need to confirm that, but yes.
Yeah. And other bonusing items that the developer is enjoying, could you clarify for me parking? What is happening there?
Sorry, through the chair. With the parking, did you say, yes. Councillor? Okay. Well, they're asking for an exemption to the parking rate. They are asking for a 0.84 rate. Right. Now, what they're doing here in this particular development is they are providing what we call tandem parking spaces. Drulo, if everyone has ever been into their parking building, they have a number of tandem parking spaces, and I can't quite recall the figure. I think it was 96 in total. So if you include that with what they're providing, they're close to 530 spaces. So there are 488 units. It almost works out to one space per unit. Certainly the direction that we're going here in the city, I'm sure the councillors are very familiar with the Crosby. That's our new zoning bylaw update. We are completely revamping our parking. I think there's been an understanding that our older parking rates under the bylaw 85-1 that Christine is referencing are dated. The actual rates are lower, and we're looking at like a 1 space per unit. That's what we're moving towards, and I believe this development achieves that. Now, also keep in mind, please, that they are doing TDM measures. So what we're trying to do now is, as a municipality, we're trying to encourage transit usage by discouraging providing large amounts of parking. A lot of studies have indicated that if you provide that surface parking, that extra parking, their residents are less inclined to use transit. So we're trying to find that balance, and I agree with Christine. We're somewhere in the middle right now. We're working on it. The rate that they're proposing is very consistent with almost all the other downtown developments that we've been seeing. They've all been less than 1 space per unit. So I really do feel that what's being proposed here with the TDM measures is in line with what we've seen.
I'm tempted to say with the exception of Brydup, but I'm not going to get into that. Could you tell me as far as the incentive on green space is concerned, can you give me some more detail on that as it applies to this development?
In terms of green space, I'm not, through the chair, I'm not sure what...
Well, in the downtown projects, are they meant to provide any green space, or?
Basically, through the Planning Act, there's 2 ways of getting land through site plan, and that's they can either dedicate land or cash in lieu. And this particular project, because it's DC exempted and it's exempted for parkland as well, they're not required to pay. And it would be a cash in lieu if we were to go that route.
And I believe there is some. Well,
there's indoor, Councillor. I think maybe what you're asking, there is private indoor amenities being provided. I think I alluded to it on the top of the podium. There's a pool and an atrium that connects the 2 towers. That effectively serves as the sort of the large amenity space for the development.
Yeah, I noticed that. My last question really is one, again, has to do with affordable housing. Obviously, you would have been in discussions with the developer to obtain the cash amount that is being suggested. Did those discussions go beyond that as to other ways that we could enjoy affordable housing? Or is that not part of what you do?
Well, I mean, first of all, I know that this council, and even as a staff, we haven't dealt with a lot of the bonusing situations. There's been a few in the downtown, for example, along Victoria Street where we've had that. The difference between anything in the downtown or the urban growth center and, let's say, this mixed-use corridor, for example, is that in the downtown, you're pretty much required to bonus because the density is set pretty low. Not so much for the mixed-use corridor, although if you're in a transit station area or a secondary plan area that this property is, they may bonus. There's that policy direction which would allow them to bonus, and one of those considerations is affordable housing. It doesn't give any specific details, and because this is new, and this is the first one we've ever dealt with, we're learning. And know that we didn't really get into those discussions other than those cash contributions, and where that came from really was we used the UGC draft zoning as sort of a guideline for this development because it's right next door to the downtown. I mean, it kind of makes sense to use it, but it doesn't fall within the downtown bonusing, so.
I guess what I'm suggesting, and that's not a question, but there are other rental developments coming down the pipe, hopefully. I know of a few in the downtown area, and I'd suggest that we go further with those discussions on affordable housing. But But that's a comment. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. All right, so a couple questions that maybe you could shed some light on. When it's referred to, in the report it refers to Class A bike stalls and Class B bike stalls on page 1-16. Can you, do we have a definition of what those are?
I don't have an official definition, but I can kind of tell you what they are. Class A is the indoor variety that if you've been to any of have had the pleasure to visit any of the newer downtown developments, are sort of locked storage facilities with racks typically where you can hang your bike on. It's that sort of idea is a Class A. Class B is the outdoor variety. You're typically your bicycle rack.
Okay, so Class A is still you're in a caged area, like your bike gets stored in a caged area among other bikes.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And then the amenity space that this group is asking for bonusing for, is it your understanding that there is a possibility that it'll be community amenity space, but that will be for rent?
Through the chair, you mean the room, right?
Yeah.
Councillor Marsh.
The 700 square foot
yes.
room.
Well, my understanding is no. That is not. That there may be a small administration fee but it was certainly nothing mentioned in that regard. My understanding was it was essentially to be for free. Now, I will say this, that we still need to work out those details yet, Councillor Marsh, and they will happen as part of the Section 37 agreement.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to make it abundantly clear that for me as one councillor, I would expect that we ensure that that is a free amenity space, but I don't know if that needs to be an amendment or what, because anybody can go rent a boardroom or, go to a restaurant and take a little extra room for a meeting, but this is about providing free meeting space for the neighborhood groups in the surrounding neighborhood, and including even the folks who will be living in these units. They will be invited to be a part of the neighborhood associations, I'm sure. So I think I'll ask, if it's not for sure, then I think at council, between now and then, I will write up an amendment to that regard. Next question is the tandem spots. Would they be, so if I'm renting a one-bedroom, and most of these are one-bedroom units, and I happen to have a tandem spot, then am I sharing that tandem spot with another person, or is this, if you have a tandem spot, you get the two spots for one unit?
Through the chair, I think that would be a question better posed for the applicant or Mr. Beekes to respond to, since Ms. George would have the most amount of experience with the tandem and how they operate those.
Mr. Beekes, can you please come forward?
And the reason I'm asking is because if we're looking at the increased sort of actual number of parking spots per unit, it seems to, I just need some clarification.
Through the chair, this is not a public space, it's private space. So these would be assigned, so if you had two cars on a two-bedroom unit or a one-bedroom unit, the cars would be assigned to that unit, so you're not bothering the other person. So it's not a public space like the City Hall parking lot where you can't have tandem. So just to make you aware, we have this extra space. We're going to use it. Underground parking is expensive, as everybody knows, and under the current City of Kitchener zoning bylaw, they don't account for tandem parking. Other municipalities, for example, Burlington, they allow you to count 25% of that as part of your parking count, but we use it all.
Okay, and so if I have unit 504 and I only have one car, do I just get assigned a single spot if I only want one, and then you can assign the tandem one to someone who has 2 cars? Is that how it works?
Yes, through the chair. So it's the only time you're using the tandems is if there's 2 cars per unit.
Okay.
So that's when you have a tandem spot. So we've never had a problem in any of our 55-plus buildings with the tandems.
Excellent. Okay, so you have about 488 units. How many, again, are single, or like 1 bedrooms, approximately?
It's a 60-40 split.
Okay.
For 1 bedrooms. I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers here in front of me.
That's okay. So 60 is 1 bedroom, 40 is bachelor? Or
2 bedrooms.
2 bedroom.
Yes.
Are there any bachelors as well?
Well, we consider the bachelor being the 1 bedroom, right? 1 bedroom plus a den.
Okay.
So.
Sure. All right. I don't want to grill you. I'm just trying to understand the tandem parking. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did have a question on the tandem parking, and it was all explained perfectly, so that takes care of that question. In regard to the bicycle calculation, there's 338 indoor stalls and 15 outdoor stalls. In parking, there is a ratio of, roughly 1.5 spaces per unit, et cetera, whatever, depending on the zoning, et cetera, and the type of unit. What's the formula for bicycles?
Through the chair, off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd have to find that out, Councillor.
Is there a formula? Or
I think there is. It's in the new Crosby bylaw, the new formula. It's not in 85-1, so it's not in effect. But what we're seeing is that in anticipation of that bylaw being put in place, developers are obviously providing that space. We're asking for it in the essence of that.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
You can send that to me later, but I just wondering whether you work with a formula or not.
Councillor Yaneski,
There is.
Councillor Yaneski, Mr.
The
Reed,
next question I have is
Councillor
regard to the...
Councillor Yaneski,
What?
Mr. Reedman can address your question.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Through the chair, the proposed Crosby bicycle parking rates are 0.25 per unit, as outlined on page 1-16.
In the Crosby book?
So the Crosby formulas are summarized on page 1-16. So Class A bike stalls, as proposed in Crosby, are 0.25 spaces per unit. So the minimum required is 122, and they're going above and beyond in their proposal.
Thank you.
The other question I have is in regard to floor space ratio. The zoning bylaws maximum is 4.0, and this proposal is 7.1. What's going to be the maximum in the new Crosby? What are they looking at that as, roughly?
Through the chair, you mean for this site, Councillor?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Through Crosby or for this site period?
Through Crosby.
I don't think we've had a figure set aside quite yet, but the Parts Central Plan, which will obviously inform the zoning, the future zoning, is 4 right now. With a recommendation, there's no height limitation, Councillor.
I know.
And it also encourages the use of bonusing. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. So are we looking now at all parts sites a higher FSR? Like this is one right, there's a transit site stop right nearby. So will all other transit stops also be that? So is 7.1 going to be a new norm?
Through the chair, no. We deal with each site on a site-by-site basis, Councillor. So there may be, in this particular site, as I've mentioned previously, what's driving that floor space ratio is the podium, which is used primarily for parking, because we really, as you're aware, it's the amount of floor space. It's not necessarily a unit increase per se. If you understand what I mean by that, it's the amount of floor space on the site is driving that 7.1. And as far as other sites within that area, not necessarily. It depends on the size of the site. There's other sort of considerations that will go into it, but we have set a max of 4. That's.
Okay. I appreciate that. So when you're looking at floor space ratio for anything from between 0 and 4, there's a calculation as to how much lot area versus building floor area, and that's how you work it out. When you do something higher than 4, and you get to 7.1, and you're including bonusing, how do you calculate bonusing in terms of a calculation?
Well, what we've done, through the chair, what we're doing right now is we're using, this is new to us as staff, and every municipality has a different approach to bonusing. What we're doing is we're sending out a bonusing chart, and that's for the UGC right now, and it's setting out a formula for what you could bonus for, depending on what you provide or what you're providing.
So will that be something that'll be included in Crosby that you're sort of relying on?
I think we're still in discussions, Councillor, on the direction on that. I think outside of the UPC, which the site is.
Okay. I see my time is up. I'll be back.
Thank you. Mayor Verbanovic.
Actually, I was in the queue for when we got to comments. So that
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, just a couple of things. We've been talking an awful lot about parking, but so I'll try and make this one really brief. Victoria One did something really unique, and that when the residents had left for work, those parking spaces became available for employees in the downtown core. Is that something that you are thinking, you may be considering as well, or I'll just put it out there for maybe you to think about? It may resolve what Ms. Stockey was talking about, that people who work in the areas may, be parking on the street. So you don't really have to answer that. You can probably, unless you wish to, you can probably just think about it. Have we set, I didn't see anywhere in here, Mr. Bateman, about delivery access for retail business. So if there's going to be retail on the main floor, will they be delivering through the front doors? And how will that affect traffic in the area?
Through the chair, there is a service entrance off of Cameron Street. So there's two principal accesses for the towers themselves, both on each street. But on Cameron, there's a service entrance as well. And that'll serve, I presume will be served, and perhaps George can confirm this, but my understanding is that will be a service entrance for retail, as well as if people are moving in, right. That's the main move-in area as well.
That where you were going, exactly where I was thinking, if that's the same setup.
So they won't be on King Street, so.
It won't be on King Street?
No, it will not.
No, okay, that's good to know. And the other question I had is, so we're talking retail spaces, but as we know, retail industry is struggling right now. Will there be other possible services like professional services or those kind of considerations? I mean, that would make it a real complete sort of its own little city, right? Commercial, professional, residential, community space. Is that part of the plan or the consideration as well? I'm sorry, that I should have been asking that when you guys were up.
Through the chair, I think I can respond to that. I mean, I know they don't have specific tenants for the retail right now, but the zoning would allow for those, so.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, just a couple more questions. In regard to the land uses and the zoning bylaw and being changed from an MU3 back to an MU3 with different regulation or different special provision, what, in general terms, what uses have you deleted and what uses are you sort of applying to this particular site that you see that fits into the character of the proposed development?
Through the chair, in terms of uses, Councillor, we have not eliminated any. We've retained what's already in the mixed-use zoning in terms of uses. I mean, what the site-specific zoning is really attempting to do is to zone the site plan as discussed. So the podium, the height of the building, for example, Councillor, the step back from the podium to the tower, the parking, the amount of retail being proposed. They are asking for a slight increase from what's currently allowed under the bylaw. Those are the sorts of things that are being addressed through that special regulation.
So mainly they're more special regulation changes as opposed to special use changes.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
What you identified is more changes to the sites pertaining to special regs as opposed to special land uses.
That's correct.
Okay. And one final question, just getting back to the parking and the bicycle, just as a general comment. And you're saying that you're reducing the parking and tandem parking to tie in with what's happening, and get people to use the LRT and using more bikes and all that type of stuff. And you're saying it's also being in line with the other developments that have taken place, one Victoria and whatever else here in the downtown. Of those sites that have already been built, these high-rise apartments and occupied, what is happening with those parking spaces and those bicycle spaces? Are they totally occupied and there's such a demand for more parking that they were, not enough parking was provided? Or do they have lots of spaces left over because maybe they provided too much parking or too many bicycle spaces? Like, what's been the result so far from what has been built using these new regs? Does anybody know?
Through the chair, I'm not specifically aware of those specific downtown buildings that you're referring to, Councillor. Oh, sorry, looks like Mr. Bloom can answer this, Councillor. I'll pass it over to him if that's okay with you.
Through the chair, not that we have studied anecdotal comments that we hear from developers, is that they're actually seeing a far less uptake on parking than they even expected. So one Victoria, for example, from what I understand, was a very aggressive parking ratio in terms of not providing as many parking spaces as are bylaw normally required, and they're actually seeing even greater, so even less usage of parking than they had anticipated. But again, that is simply anecdotal commentary from developers.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions for staff. I guess you will put forward your motion or your amendment, Councillor Etherington. Do you want to speak to it first, Frank? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, seconded by Councillor Marsh. And really it goes to the request that I was making to the delegates to make sure we meet again to come up with more detail on the whole subject of affordable housing. And in my final comments, I referred to that as well. Do you want me to comment now or wait for comments?
You can make your comments now.
Yeah, first off, I wanted to congratulate the developer for working with the community and working well with the City Hall to do the best for the East End neighbourhood and the city. I now know that, and was quite surprised to find out that Drewlo is ahead of us on establishing ways to create affordable housing in some of its developments across Ontario in other cities. I'd very much like to see Kitchener involved in those commendable programs. And to me, as everyone knows, it's incredibly frustrating that we are still not there. So this could be the first example of us finally using bonusing to achieve some lower cost housing. And that would be lower cost housing that you would not even know was there. It would be fitted into a development like this one. Other developments, I'm sure other developments would follow along with a little encouragement from our staff. Chair Ioannidis and myself sit on Kitchener Housing, the Kitchener Housing Board, and I think we could make much better use of Kitchener Housing to manage this type of unit, or these type of units in development, and in that way help out or encourage developers who don't want to be involved necessarily in that aspect of just controlling those rents and getting involved in that kind of detail. They would build and then turn those units over to be managed. The opportunities, in my opinion, are there, and we're missing out on those opportunities. And I think it's time we became much more proactive in that field. And that's a field that this council would remember was stated as one of its top priorities. So we've got a top priority, and in my kind of language, we're doing diddly squat on that priority. This is the first chance we could have to move on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Just one question on the amendment. I'm certainly inclined to support it, but it's a little unclear in terms of how it's tied to the approval of the amendment and the zone change. So my understanding would be that the developer, through this discussion, they would have some clarity, hopefully in time, well, I guess certainly in time for the council meeting where we'd ratify this.
Yeah, Councillor Davey, I would, you're right, it should have been in there. That was what I had in mind when I wrote it, that we would attempt to meet with them and have something ready to form part of that approval. The last thing I want to do is hold up this development.
Okay, excellent. I'm happy to support that then. I'll just comment briefly. I'm really happy to see this proposal before us. I think the quality of the building is good, but more importantly, there is, anyone that's been following this in our community, there's a real need for more rental housing in our region. There was a very well-written article in the Kitchener Post, I think around mid-May, that was detailing the scarcity of rental properties in our region, and apparently, despite the fact that wages have only grown around 12 to 15% since 2011, the cost for rent has gone up about 20%, and that's symptomatic of what's going on out there in terms of the availability. What makes matters worse is there's obviously new federal regulations surrounding mortgages that's making this even tighter. People are going to have to rent a lot longer, so I can really see this exacerbating the issue we have in our region. So I'm happy to support the quality, and I'm happy to support this fulfillment of the need in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Didn't want to speak if it wasn't my turn. This is a very interesting development, and I'm really glad to see Drulo entering into something different than their usual standard design. I've had some not so positive experiences at your previous, not that I've lived there, but my family lived there. So I think this is a really great setting. It actually really reminds me of something I would see in Europe, in Germany, in Holland, and other countries. So kudos to you and to staff, because I'm sure that there was a little bit of pushing and there was a little bit of shoving and a little bit of agreement and discussion. So I think this is really a good way to go. I think it's going to really make that site look interesting and animated and lively, with people coming and going and working and living and playing, I guess. I do think it's very important for us to whether it's part of our site plan conditions or what part it fits in, is to do pre and post existing conditions for the residents living around that development. Their houses are older. This is a significant change to what they've had, and we're going to have to put in some pretty deep shoring to support these buildings and the podium. So I think for the residents, I think they have to have that, knowing that that's going to be there for them. I still have a few concerns about the shadow studies, because I don't think it's good for houses and people to be living in the shadow, especially in the winter. But I'm hoping that what you're doing at that location will draw people out even in the winter, so that maybe they will go into to retail businesses, and on days that are not so sunny, they'll be at least outside, maybe enjoying the cafes or amenities that are at that space. So I look forward to seeing how this all plays out. A 4-year construction timeframe is long for residents to deal with, and it's long for everybody in terms of the implications on the traffic in that area. I just hope that things move along quickly and efficiently for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
Before I make my comments, just a question to staff. It's my understanding that under the Planning Act, you require park dedication, and under the park dedication, according to the Planning Act, it has to be used for park dedication purposes. And here we have a scenario of an amendment put forward to be used to the region for affordable housing. I don't think it complies with the Planning Act intent, and plus that the park dedication is a municipal thing as opposed to a regional one, so I can't see how we're passing that. I look for an explanation from staff or legal staff on the conformity of that amendment to the Planning Act.
Who's going to address that? Mr. Pennard? Oh. Mr. Tansley? Or Pennard? Mr. Pennard?
No, I'll start it off. Through you, Mr. Chair. This amendment, although some specifics do need to be ironed out, but the topic of this and what it's trying to achieve is within our jurisdiction in terms of the way that we apply bonusing. Subject to the details, that amendment is appropriate and is within our authority as stipulated under the Planning Act and our official plan. As to the parkland dedication, it is a municipal bylaw that currently exempts parkland dedication in this area, and that is why it's being dealt with the way that it is.
So if the bylaw exempts park dedication in this area, if that's the case, so therefore there's no money coming in, so there's nothing to pass over to the region.
Through you, Chair, if I can take a try at answering the councillor's question. The money that would be coming for the bonusing is separate from parkland. It has no relationship to the parkland dedication at all. It's totally separate, if that helps. Because there's a parkland exemption, and that's one policy. But this policy that this amendment or this recommendation would be referring to is bonusing under the Planning Act, which, as Mr. Pennard says, we do have the authority to deal with. But they're separate cash sources, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're sort of mixing apples and oranges the way I see it, and I don't think it's done right, but I'm not sure what the legal implication is.
Councillor Yaneski, we're not here to debate whether or not this is a valid response to Councillor Etherington's motion. Staff has said they'll look into it, and can we move on, please?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Staff has indicated that it's in the spirit of the bonusing, which is under their purview. Can we now please move on with that?
Well, I don't. That's the only question I had. In terms of comments with regards to this proposal, I think it's a great development. It's a perfect location for these two large towers with a connection between them. It fits perfectly on the LRT system. It is something that we really want along the King Street corridor, as an increase in the development and the look of the city and the general core area. So I'm prepared to support the development because I think, in my opinion, when you look at the overall implication on this, and notwithstanding some number of the questions that we've had, I still think it's very good planning.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Just in regards to the bonusing, I just want to ask if staff could refresh council, just send please the bonusing chart that was created as a draft for the Urban Growth Center so that we can move on from that question mark. I want to also thank the applicant for their willingness to come to the table and really dig into the different options for amenity bonusing, and I look forward to our conversation later this week. I am interested also in following up on some of Ms. Stockey's feedback. Thank you, Ms. Stockey, for coming in and sharing your insights and some of the ways that this development might impact the surrounding neighborhoods is something that can be dealt with separately, including the parking and the left-hand turns, etc., and the snow removal. So this will not be a part of the same. I don't have any additional amendments beyond making sure that the amenity space is going to be free and to talk about affordable housing.
Thank you. Mayor Verbanovic.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you to the Drulo team for the work that's been done and for everybody who participated in the process. As I said earlier, when we initially met, you had made some commitments about working with us to come up with a proposal that was fitting and appropriate for an entry into our downtown, and I think this genuinely reflects that. There's no doubt there's some that would like to maybe see something different or something else, but I think this speaks to many of the principles that we as a community have previously identified, and so thank you in that regard. I think there were some issues that remain outstanding that are outside of this proposal, as Councillor Marsh has spoken about, that Ms. Stockey raised, and I think staff can work with the delegation on that going forward. However, I think there is one thing that did come up in the discussion, and that is this notion of looking at your parking. I think with the tandem, we're addressing sort of that overall need that might exist in the building. But I think there may be an opportunity for you, quite frankly, that also has a revenue stream attached to it. And that's the notion of what we're experiencing at 1 Victoria with the sort of shared use of daytime and nighttime. And that's a business decision that you need to make. But knowing the increased demand for parking in the downtown, I think it could be a win-win for everybody to explore that going forward. As far as Councillor Etherington's amendment goes, I'm certainly happy to support the continued dialogue. I think we need to really have our staff, regional staff, Kitchener Housing, and maybe even some reps from the federal government sit down and figure out exactly what's the right model here. So, I mean, we heard from the Drulo team that, they were open to a $125,000 cash commitment and 2 sort of sets of 5 units. I think, how do we make sure that as we go forward, we maximize any opportunities that might be coming from federal money? And as Councillor Etherington said, also maximize the connection with Kitchener Housing going forward, and then move this piece forward. But I think it would be a welcome addition to the project. But overall, this is going to be a welcome addition to downtown. We do need more higher quality rental housing. I know the buildings that you have downtown already are well received, and we look forward to seeing this new investment come into our core. Thank you.
Okay, we have no further comments. I won't bother making any comments. I am in agreement with what the majority have been said. So with that, we'll call the question, the amendment first. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And then the recorded vote on the main motion. The polls are open. And that's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to item number 2, and that's dealing with zone change application on 25 and 75 Fallowfield Drive. And Mr. Pennell will be providing us with a staff presentation. Mr. Pennell, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm here tonight to speak to the recommendation before you regarding the proposed zone change application for 25 and 75 Fallowfield Drive. The 2 vacant subject properties are located on the north side of Fallowfield Drive at the intersection of Block Line Road in the community of Country Hills East. The subject properties represent the remainder of the lands to be developed by Drulo Holdings along this stretch of Fallowfield Drive. As you can see from the aerial photograph provided, there are 4 Drulo towers that have already been constructed immediately east of the subject property. Each of these towers that's been constructed is 12 stories in height. The lands on the opposite side of Fallowfield Drive are developed with low-density residential uses, including 2 townhouse developments, as well as a mix of semi and single detached houses. A hydro corridor, stormwater management pond, and a railway corridor are located to the north of the lands. St. Mary's Catholic High School is located on the opposite side of Block Line Road to the northwest. And the subject lands are within half a kilometer walk to the Block Line Ion station at Cortland Avenue. The majority of the subject lands are designated medium-rise residential in the 2014 official plan, while a smaller portion is designated mixed use. On this slide, I've provided some conceptual renderings that show the development on 25 and on 75 Fallowfield Drive. For 25 Fallowfield Drive, the applicant is proposing to construct 43 townhouses within 7 townhouse blocks. The existing R6 zoning would be retained, and a special zoning provision would allow the townhouses to have an increased floor space ratio of 0.69, an increased height of 12.3 meters, and a decreased parking ratio of 1.4 spaces per dwelling unit. Noise mitigation measures would also be incorporated into the development, among other matters. For 75 Fallowfield Drive, the applicant is proposing to change the zoning from R6 to R8 with special zoning to allow the construction of 2 apartment buildings with a total of 182 dwelling units. 1 apartment building would front onto Fallowfield Drive and be 5 stories in height, and the other building would be located directly behind the 5-story building and have a height of 8 stories. The proposed special zoning provision would limit the floor space ratio to 1.5 and increase the maximum building height to 25 meters, which is an additional 1 meter above what the zoning allows currently. Noise mitigation measures would also be incorporated into this development, among other matters. Preliminary circulation of the zone change application was undertaken in May of last year to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. In total, 20 written responses were received. In addition, planning staff hosted a neighborhood information meeting in October of last year, and approximately 16 community members attended. Since 1994, the city's intention for the subject lands has been to facilitate medium-rise residential development. The requested zone change would have the effect of implementing the city's policies allowing such development to occur. Had the applicant not submitted the subject private zoning application, city staff would have soon undertaken a city-initiated zone change through the Crosby project, or comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw, which we've heard about tonight. And that would likely culminate in a recommendation that is very similar to the one that you see before you today. Planning staff is satisfied that the proposed zoning represents good planning and is in the public interest of the city as a whole. The proposal conforms to city, regional, and provincial policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pennell. We do have delegations. I guess it's a joint delegation, Mr. Galbraith and Mr. Bickus.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Dave Galbraith, and I'm a planner with IBI Group out of Waterloo's office. I'm here tonight with George Bickus again on behalf of the applicant Drulo Holdings, who are proposing to develop the properties municipally known as 25 and 75 Fallowfield Drive. In advance of this meeting, we have reviewed the staff report prepared by Andrew and agree with the analysis, conclusions, and recommendations of the report. As you have heard, my client is proposing to develop the property to accommodate a residential development featuring a 5 and an 8-story apartment building containing 182 apartment units and 7 townhouse blocks containing 43 units. This development will represent the final build-out of this stretch of Fallowfield Drive and will feature a built form that complements the existing neighborhood. The townhouses and apartment blocks will share a common entrance off of Fallowfield Drive to minimize access from the street, and the apartment blocks will feature a transition in density from the higher buildings towards the rear of the site to the 5-story building adjacent to Fallowfield. To foster a neighborhood feel, the townhouses have been aligned with the street line and brought close to the street. As you've heard, the subject property has been contemplated for a similar scale of development since 1994, and the current official plan permits a floor space ratio of 2.0. While the proposed FSR of 1.4 and 0.69 represent increases from the existing zoning, the densities are in line with the overall direction of the official plan. For about the past year, our client and their consulting team have worked closely with city staff towards the review and refinement of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. In my opinion, as detailed in the planning justification and urban design brief, the zoning bylaw conforms to the policy direction applicable to the site. If you have any questions, George and I would be happy to answer them now.
We do have some questions. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So this is I know that there's been a number of concerns around, you know, what's been left, the residual effects of the 4 apartment buildings you have developed there. So I'm sure that the neighborhood in general is happy to see the next phase happening. So when I'm looking at page 2-26, it talks about site and location, and then there's a map on 2-27, and you list 10 different sites. Can you help me understand what your intent on this mapping was? I mean, what are you trying to show here? You've got row houses, commercial plaza, the sportsplex, the gas station, the railway corridor. I mean, it's a mixed bag here, so I'm not sure what you're trying to show.
Yeah, there was no agenda with that figure. It was just to show the context of the neighborhood. As Andrew had mentioned, we're within a stone's throw to the Ion Station stop, and this area has been planned to accommodate a mix of land uses, and to a large extent that has been achieved already. So that figure was just to show the neighboring context and how there are apartment buildings, there are townhouses all within close range to the site.
So from your last apartment building on Fallowfield that's just completed, to walk up to the Ion Station, because it's uphill all the way, what's the distance? Do you know?
I believe it's about 450 to 500 meters from the site, and that's across the Cortland, across the bridge. Andrew's nodding. So.
Would you say it's more or less a 10-minute walk?
I guess it depends on the walker, I guess, but it does fit within the 800-meter range, which is typical for a 10-minute walk.
Okay. Just having attended recently Livable Cities conference that talked about 10-minute healthy communities in Ottawa, it was very interesting to see that the standard that they're trying to set is a healthy community is a 10-minute walk from where you live. Now that's, that's a pretty high standard, but that's why I was asking about what this map was intending to do, because, walking to the Husky Gas Bar, if you're walking, you're not really, what are you going there for, kind of thing. I certainly see that this has got the connections to the high school where there's a library and to the Ion so that people can get to other things in the area. I was looking again at my second favorite thing to do is looking at shadow studies, and through the descriptions on page 258, 259, 60 and 61. So you've got I hesitate to say that you put the positive information in June in the middle between the March, September, and December, but there's a significant amount of shadow from your existing buildings hitting, I believe it's the 2 apartment buildings between September to March. Is that, am I reading these correctly? Is that what I'm seeing to the left? Let's just look at page 260. September at 10 a.m. The shadow that I see there is from your existing buildings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
Okay. So, I understand you need to make profit, and building a certain height is what's going to bring that profit in, but I would be concerned about that, the shadows for September, December through March.
And if I may, if you look at the orientation of the 5 and the 8-story building versus what exists right now, they're perpendicular to the existing buildings. So if they were parallel, the shadow impacts would be a lot more dramatic on those buildings. But given that they are perpendicular, it's just the side of the building that's really affected.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. This is a very dense, just in general, your entire site. What do you anticipate? So you said that, I did have it written down, the number of units for the apartment was 43 units. Is that 43 units per block or the entire 7 blocks?
So that's for the townhouse portion of the site,
yes.
the western portion of the site, that's 43 townhouses total.
Oh, 43 town, okay. And the apartment buildings were 5 and 8 and 150?
182.
182,
units.
Okay. So that's not quite, sorry, it's not, I was thinking you were talking about 43 units per each block, so it's not quite as dense as I thought it would be. Where do you suggest or think that the residents would go for green space? I mean, the townhomes will have some of their green space, but those apartment buildings don't have a lot. Where would you suggest people go to get refuge from living in concrete buildings?
So if you're still on the shadow study page, between the 5 and the 8-story building, there's a large landscaped area between those two buildings, and there's planned to be a play area and some landscaping within between those spaces. Mm-hmm. And then for the townhouses, they'll either have private backyards, or terraces above their driveways. So there will be the private space in those units. I also note that for building coverage, the zoning bylaw says that you can have a maximum coverage of 45% across the site, and here, and the amount of landscaping provided on the site exceeds that. There's about 12,000 square meters or square feet? Yeah, square meters of landscaped area across the two sites.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question to the chair. Did you just give me an extra 5 minutes? Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, if I may add to that as well, Fallowfield Park is basically a 2-minute walk. So there is a park that was part of our subdivision, Country Hills, that Drula Holdings developed, and the city has now assumed that park. So there is a park that's right beside the four towers on Fallowfield.
I apologize, I didn't know that. So the amenity space, that's excellent. That's easily walkable for everybody that lives there. And you, I hope that you'll work with our staff around some very unique ideas that our parks staff are doing in terms of making sure that it's a park that goes from tot to teen kind of thing, and seniors as well. I think that was all the questions I had on this. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a mover? Okay. Councillor Gazzola will move it, but Scott, you have a question?
Yes, just one, sir. Just on the shadow, just looking at this, looking at that page 260 and looking at the map, this entire development is north of all of the residences. So just to be clear, the only shadows this is really going to be casting is on your own development.
That's correct. So if you look at the shadow impacts from the proposed development today, they're casting shadows towards the north, and none of the shadows are actually going across Fallowfield onto the lower density housing.
Okay, just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you care to say any comments?
Yeah, I will support this. I think it's a good thing for the area. It finishes off the area. I know you're concerned about first the vicinity to the LRT. I have walked it in my old age, and it's quite walkable, easy to get to. There's a fair amount of green space there. Right across from the park that they're talking about is the trail that we put in last year. So there's all sorts of amenities, and going beyond the parkland, there's even more green space and natural space. So I think it's an addition to the neighborhood, completes the neighborhood up. I think the biggest argument I've heard from the neighborhood, I think it's gone very well, but the biggest argument I've heard is about the mess that's there now, which will, with this project, will be cleaned up and much more suitable. So I would ask everyone to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski. Mr. Beckus,
through the chair, if I may just comment, we did clean up our site, blocks 2 and 3, where 25 and 75 Fallowfield will be developed. So we have cleaned up that site.
Thank you.
For the record.
Okay. Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, I have a question to staff. In regards to the parking, looking at the responses from the residents, we just had recently traffic calming or parking signs installed to remove parking certain sides of the Fallowfield because of traffic and the width of the road. And now with the parking here being slightly reduced, are we now compounding the situation and creating more? I mean, the people who are parking there right now, are they parking because they don't have enough parking spaces in the apartment building, or why?
Sorry, I clicked the wrong one. Mr. Pinnell.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is a traffic calming project that's underway. I believe that it's to begin construction this summer. And on the opposite side of the road, further down in front of the existing apartment buildings, there will be some restrictions placed on on-street parking. However, in front of the existing, or in front of the subject site, there will not be any further proposed parking restrictions. There will be on-street parking directly in front of these two lots. Through this zone change, there has been a transportation impact study as well as a parking reduction justification study completed, and that those studies showed clearly that there is a surplus of parking on the site. Even though there is a parking reduction sought, there is adequate parking that's provided on the site.
Okay, I appreciate the answers, and the parking you said in front of the property would be along fallow field, not block line, right? Because block line is restricted.
Correct.
Okay, so along fallow field. So, but when you look at the responses from the residents, they just have a lot of concern with the traffic and getting by and congestion. I don't know if this is an issue. That's where I was just coming from. So, anyways, are we going for comments right now?
That's what this was for.
Okay, I'm prepared to support the application. I still think it's good development in the area, notwithstanding some of the issues, and that's basically it. Make it short and sweet.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. You can sit down. We will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Okay, on to our final item, dealing with the draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zone change application for 1940 Fisher-Holman Road, 163 Plains Road, and 780 Huron Road. And Ms. Katie Andro will have a presentation for staff. Welcome.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm here this evening to speak to the recommendations before you with respect to the Becker Estate subdivision. This subdivision originally received draft plan approval in 2009 from the Ontario Municipal Board. It has not undergone development other than some site grading over the last number of years. They've been waiting for the extension of the Strasbourg Trunk Sanitary Sewer, which is now underway, and development can occur in the next short while once that's in place. Since 2009, when the subdivision, the official plan, and the zoning were originally approved, things have changed with respect to the types of zoning, market preferences of residential developers, that sort of thing. And so the applicant's proposing some minor modifications to the plan, along with an official plan amendment and zone change that would support those modifications. And the intent of these is really to put in place some more contemporary zoning regulations that would result in some improved design flexibility and land efficiencies. So this subdivision had a big focus on urban design already back in 2009, and one of the main focuses was around a large central green space area. The plan also includes a elementary school, large mixed-use blocks, large swim pond, and open space complex. And the main area of change with respect to the modification is circled in red up here. There's a medium-density, multiple residential block that is proposed to be reoriented into local streets with low-rise residential development, so houses and street-fronting towns. The density that was anticipated for that block has been relocated along the park. These were originally anticipated to be townhouses and are now proposed to be more of a stacked townhouse type development. So similar density as to what would have been achieved. It's a swap of where those densities are. The plan has also been updated to adjust some of the staging boundaries, to lot out a couple of the earlier stages. I understand builders are now on board, and so they have a better sense of what the lotting fabric would be, and so our practice is to lot those out. Typically, that would be done as a minor modification by staff. In this case, because it's coming to council anyways for the official plan amendment and zone change, we've incorporated it all together. The adjustments to the zoning and to the designation support the modifications to the plan, as well as I mentioned, introducing some more contemporary zoning regulations. These are in line with the recent changes that we've seen in the Rosenberg area as well as in Dune South. They allow for compact neighborhoods with attractive streetscapes, usable front porches, variations to some of the roof lines by slight increases in height, for instance, in the townhouse blocks. And it also helps to create a distinct sense of place in these neighborhoods. I would note that we did circulate a revised bylaw to you at the beginning of this meeting. There was a slight revision to the proposed driveway setbacks to intersections, and we were working on that over the last few days. The applicant had provided some additional technical information from a traffic consultant to our transportation services staff, who are now satisfied that a 6-meter setback between driveways and intersections is generally acceptable for all local street, all lots that front onto local streets. There's one exception to that, which is captured in the bylaw, and that's where there's a narrow lot with a single driveway that's right by a stop bar, where a 6-meter setback would not be appropriate because you don't have enough room for a car to stop without blocking the driveway. And that was recommended to be a 7-meter setback. And the applicants are supportive of these changes. Transportation Services staff are satisfied that the revisions provide a safe stopping distance, functional operation of the intersections, and the driveways. So another unique feature of this plan is all the park spaces in the development. So the park locations and sizes are exactly as they were originally draft approved, with a large central park. That's the real design feature, and everything sort of focuses on that. And then you'll notice a series of parks located along a diagonal, and that's the former alignment of Plains Road, which has now been closed. And the intention of those parks is to commemorate Plains Road and to incorporate some heritage features. There's also a neighborhood park that's just south of that light green block. And the light green indicates where the swim pond and open space are, and a landscaping block along Huron Road. So the owner is proposing to develop these parks to a high urban design standard, and with features that are beyond those that might typically be considered for neighborhood parks. And to help support their vision, the owner is proposing an innovative park ownership structure and a maintenance model, where the parks would be retained in private ownership and maintained jointly by the property owners. However, these parks would remain fully publicly accessible. Staff have dubbed these privately owned and maintained publicly accessible parks, or I'll refer to them as POMPA parks. So some of the key things I'd like to highlight with respect to this proposal: these parks would be designed to the city's satisfaction, so they would still need to meet all the requirements of parks. However, they might have some features that are in addition to what we would typically be able to consider as part of a neighborhood park. And they would be built up front by the subdivider. They've indicated that that model has been really successful in other neighborhoods, and they'd like to build those in advance of residents moving in the stages as they come online. Each lot, so each dwelling in the subdivision, would be part of what's called a common elements condominium. And the purpose of that condominium is to collect condo fees that would cover the maintenance and replacement costs associated with these parks. So this would require some agreements and securities to ensure that the parks will be publicly accessible. So some of these conditions are starting to be anchored into the subdivision agreement, but we would anticipate other agreements as well, such as plans of condominium, so condominium agreements, maintenance agreements perhaps, license agreements, options to purchase, and securities, so like letters of credit, to ensure things are built and maintained to our standards. So the agreements would indicate or would require that they have to be maintained to the city's standards, and there would be clauses in the agreements, and they are already worked into the subdivision agreement, where they would be able to be conveyed to public ownership as parkland at any time and for any reason. So staff recognize that this will be the first time the City of Kitchener is looking at would be looking at an approach like this. And should things not proceed as anticipated, or if things change in the future, there'd be a mechanism for these to become part of the city's parkland and fully in public ownership, the way any park would be in a new subdivision. However, while the parks are in private ownership, the city would have no liability or maintenance responsibility with respect to those spaces. So we're of the opinion that there's merit in exploring this concept further. It's been tried in a few other municipalities, in Waterloo and in Guelph and in Breslau. It represents an innovative and a creative approach to the provision and ongoing maintenance of those park spaces. And therefore, we've included a recommendation in our report that would direct staff to proceed with some further discussions, further investigations, and some negotiations with the property owners and with the developer to implement this parks concept. The recommendation also recommends that the mayor and clerk be authorized to enter into necessary agreements, and which would deem the concept to comply with the city's parkland dedication policy. The recommendation does not recommend that it be finally approved and accepted. We acknowledge that there's more work that needs to be done before we will accept that, and the way the conditions of the subdivision have been set up puts it solely in the city's discretion as to whether we decide to proceed or not. Otherwise, these parks would proceed exactly as we've anticipated over the last 10 years, that they would become city-owned and operated neighborhood parks. So the recommendation of this report is that the designation, zoning, and the conditions of draft plan approval implement appropriate changes to the subdivision. We are of the opinion that the Pompa Park concept represents a unique opportunity to pilot an alternative approach to the provision of parkland in new subdivisions, and staff support further pursuing this proposal. There's a third bullet point, but it's not coming up. I could just speak to it. Ultimately, staff are of the opinion that the subject applications represent good planning, and we recommend approval. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Oh, there's your comment. We'll take questions for you, Katie, after we have the delegation. So I'll click in. Councillor Marsh has clicked in. I'll click you back in at the appropriate one. Councillor Gazzola. Go ahead.
So I just found it a little distracting. I'm just trying to find the driveway reference that was added to our desks. Can you just point us to what page number that's on, or I guess what item number it is?
Go ahead, Ms. Andrew.
So through you, the zoning bylaw is on, I guess it's section 3 of this report. So on the original version of the report, it's page 3-29. And we had circulated a separate document that is the revised zoning regulations. So at the bottom of that page 3.29, under section 732, it's some general regulations that speak to types of contemporary zoning in the neighborhood. And specifically, it's at subsection 3 that speaks to where the driveway setbacks, what they will be, given the different types of lots and the different types of streets that those lots may front.
I'm still lost, but that's okay. Let's move on. I can't find it.
Maybe during
the zoning bylaw, it's clause 21,
Marsh,
section.
maybe during the presentation of the delegates, that may be able to address some of your concerns. Okay, our first delegate is Mr. Chris Pigeon from GSP Group.
So this is the original plan of subdivision from 2009. Yeah, their opportunity, in fact, recommended approval that land uses have changed, market conditions have changed, into incorporated into the plan, and stacked townhouses didn't exist as separated into the plan, among other things. So, OPA, ZBA, and this draft plan. About plan remains the same, so a grid pattern form of streets, Central Park, which is the jewel of this plan of subdivision, mixed use, elementary school, a main street at the entrance, Fisher Hallman Road, which is opposite the City of Kitchener Community Park. As well, we'll focus the density rather than at the periphery, so on the arterial roads, it'll be focused on the Central Park, on Main Street. And Schlegel's commit to the commemorative Plains Road, as they did in 2009, as well as the preservation of their heritage house on this property. He's already covered off the changes. So this plan had an interesting and humble beginning. So in 2006, these are 3 concepts that we worked up with City of Kitchener staff in 2006 when we started this process. Some of those staff are now retired. They included Jeff Wilmer, Katie, Della Ross, and Brandon Sloan. So this was the evolution that ultimately evolved into the grid pattern that is before committee this evening.
Thanks. And I just wanted to take a moment, because I know it's often said from this podium that we appreciate the work of staff, but I wanted to personally thank Katie, who's been the real quarterback on this file going back to 2007, 2008, and bringing us here to 2018. Della Ross, who has been involved on some of the larger issues. Brandon and Jeff, as Chris has mentioned. Also the engineering department, I realize they're not here tonight, but Christine Goulet, Katie Pierzak, led by Linda Cooper. There's been a lot of complexity on this file. There's a long history with South Strasbourg, and staff really have truly worked very hard to work with us to bring this to fruition. Most recently, we've been working cooperatively with the Parks Department. Karen Lisa has now passed the file to Tim O'Brien, and he's very excited about working with us on these park designs, and it's great to be working collaboratively with the city staff on what's, I think, going to be a community that we're all very proud of. Also, there's been a lot of heritage cooperation, working with the Heritage Committee, Michelle, Leon, and Lenore, Transportation, Legal Services. There's been a lot of involvement from staff, and it's been a very positive experience of late, working through the many details.
So one other change with this subdivision, it's no longer known as Becker Estates. It's actually being called the Wollaston neighborhood. So Hugh Wallace of Scotland purchased what would eventually become the Becker Farm in 1854. He sold it to John Wallace in 1869, who built the Becker farmhouse that's proposed to be retained as a sales center for the home builders as an interim use, and then ultimately integrated into a large medium density block. So you'll notice the street names on the plan of subdivision have been carefully chosen and placed, and they have a relationship to the heritage, the history of the ownership of the property, and the attributes of the site. So the Wollaston neighborhood will continue to be a complete community with community facilities, including a school, Central Park, community trails that will extend beyond this neighborhood, commercial goods and services, and a mix of housing forms and tenures, and of course the Heritage Commemoration. And there are 2 components to the Heritage Commemoration. One is the preservation of the Becker farmstead, and the second is the Plains Road Commemoration. So these are photographs from 2012 of the Becker farmstead, and then these are the current photographs, and you can see that the adaptive reuse of this heritage house and the improvements that are being undertaken by Schlegels are being integrated into this this wonderful stone building. So the Heritage Commemoration actually came to council and celebrates Plains Road and its alignment through the 5. And that commemoration came to council, and council parks paid for by the city, and then the is a very exciting opportunity to be before you tonight. To launch onto something new and innovative in the City of Kitchener. The Plains Road Commemoration provides that opportunity for the enhancements to the parkland. The parks and open spaces will be owned and maintained by the condominium corporations throughout the subdivision, but they will be completely publicly accessible. So the areas in green will be predominant residents in this subdivision, and then the areas, spaces associated with the main street, for example, winners. So these are some photographs of examples of what is being termed pompous. So these are the parks and open spaces that include entrance features, parks and parkettes, community trails, and landscape buffers. These are images taken from Westminster Woods in Guelph. So this community has been around for about 20 years. It's a residential community where the owners pay a condominium fee to maintain these enhancements in their parkland. But they, again, are all publicly accessible. So the parks in this subdivision will be passive parks, so sitting areas and gardens. But in addition, there will be active areas in the central park, so a basketball court, soccer pitch, for example, will be opportunities for active recreation. We've reviewed the staff report, and we are pleased to indicate we are 100% in favor of the recommendations before you. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. We do have some questions for you. Mayor Verbanovic.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your presentation. It's interesting to see how the project has evolved over its history, and to see the concept that's before us today. And it's, I have to say, very exciting. But I'm particularly excited about the park concept that you're bringing forward. And I don't know if you can answer this, or staff, or some combination thereof. This sounds very similar to what we did over on Victoria Commons, but it sort of sounds like a Victoria Commons situation. I seem to recall that I think they kept the land in their name as well, and they maintain it for us. I'm not sure if either of you know.
Ms. Ross?
Yeah. Through you, Chair. That's correct, Mayor Verbanovic. It was a little different setup with Victoria Commons. We didn't have this type of setup that is proposed in the subdivision, but yes, very similar with a privately owned public park.
Okay. And when we talk about things like sports fields, gentlemen, like the soccer pitch and so on, is the idea that that would, again, be primarily for, public access in that neighborhood, but is it one that potentially could even be part of our overall inventory, or is that something that's still sort of up for discussion?
Through you, Chair. So the sports fields will be just for the residents, so it's not anticipated to be a part of the minor sports, for example, but it would be fully available to the public.
Right. Okay, that's great, and so the concept is, quite frankly, it's a great deal. It sees the parkland developed at the front end. It sees it maintained to a higher standard, which is consistent with the neighborhood, and I guess both sides have an out going forward. So thanks for some innovative thinking on that front. It's quite exciting.
Thank you. Councillor Unesky.
Very good project. Just one straightforward question dealing with the Heritage House that was on Fisher Hallman there. Where is it, when I'm looking at the plan of subdivision, is it incorporated within the plan? I couldn't identify it, or unless I'm missing something. Help me out here.
It's located in stage 14, so you can see...
That's what I thought, but it just says multiple dwellings there, so...
Yeah. You have that plan in front of you, or we can put it back on the screen. But
right in the corner, bottom left-hand corner.
So it's in the block in the lower left of the plan.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It's in the block lower left of the plan on the screen. And it's the small bubble out. The house, if you've been by on Fisher Hallman, is very close to the road. Hallman is widened to 4 lanes. It will actually bend and push to the west in order to give some space for this house to remain where.
So right where that line comes in is a slate jog sort of halfway down. That's where you're talking, right? Yeah. That's what I thought it was, because no, I've been in the building. I just wasn't sure, whether it was a separate block for, I guess there is, but fine print is so fine to read.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's not in a separate block, in a medium density block. So it will be incorporated into that medium density, perhaps as a community facility as a part of that.
Oh, okay. I see where you're coming from. I thought it would be a separate block or something like that. Okay. That's fine. Great project. Totally supportable.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I apologize that I missed Ms. Andrell's presentation. I needed to speak to Mr. about student housing. So if my questions are repeats, I apologize. So I do have a lot of them, but some of them I hope will just be quick responses. Page 3-5, there's some comments about the transportation staff and some setbacks and the committee of adjustment. Can you help me understand, is this something that in accordance to, it says as such in accordance with the S45 of the Planning Act, recommendation B of this report includes a statement whereby a council permits the applicant to make applications for minor variances to the bylaw within 2 years of the bylaw being amended. If staff is not in support of this, why would we allow a 2-year window for variances? And if it's a staff question, maybe what I'll do is I'll zip through these for the delegation, and then we'll hold on to the staff questions for my next round. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Going to 3-15. This talks about the, and I apologize, the Yog Temple, which I know there are representatives here. Have we resolved all of the concerns that they had with regard to the road closure and traffic volumes for them?
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, so there was an EA that was done for Plains Road to close Plains Road and bulb it. So there will be a cul-de-sac bulb constructed as a part of the first stage of this plan of subdivision.
Okay, thank you. In page 3-8, you list all the different blocks, and you talk about some mixed use. Again, I referred to the Making Livable Cities 10-minute Healthy Communities conference I was at. What do we see in this development in terms of walkability to some of the amenities? You've got some great park spaces here. I take it that the diamonds I see across the road, are those across the road or are they within your development? At the top left-hand corner, are those ball diamonds?
Those would be our Southwest District Park.
That's our park across the street. Okay. So what other amenities do you see that would be within a 10-minute walk for residents living at the bottom corner to the top corner?
So if I recall back to our report in 2009, I think everyone that is in this neighborhood is within a 5-minute walk shed of the central linear park. And there's also the additional parkettes that are throughout the plan along the former Plains Road alignment. The 26 acres of mixed-use zoned lands, which is along Fisher-Hallman on the other side from the district park, the RBJ Schlegel Park, is it supports residential up to 14 stories in height. It supports a grocery store up to 70,000 square feet. We are in discussions with commercial tenants for those lands, so we anticipate a Williamsburg Town Center type development on those lands that are across the street from the district park. And those amenities then, walkable for the neighborhood, and also then the features within the park that would be additional to what might be in a standard City of Kitchener park.
Okay, so just a quick, on this map, would that be where, let's say the two tall blocks are? Is that where you're talking about a commercial real estate?
That's correct. We can go 14 stories in height if we have ground floor retail or office, 12 stories in height without that.
Okay, so just going quickly through a few more, some of the conditions I noticed, like on 3-40, the vibrations around grading, something that I've heard about a lot from residents adjacent to the Activa development that used to be Ormston Lands. I'm glad to see that you're talking already about putting in on-street parking bays, bicycle lanes, multi-use pathways. That's very positive that you're doing that as well as I think there was also some traffic calming that you had already talked about in some of the conditions. I think those are excellent. We don't have to follow up later on with people saying everybody's speeding down our street. 73 was another page. Sorry, guys. The commemoration cost sharing schedule. So right now I see that the city is contributing $150,000 and the developers contributing $123,000. Shouldn't this be an equal share, developer and city?
Well, this is something that was deliberated back in 2009, and that agreement was put in place at that time. I think what the number reflects is the typical City of Kitchener investment in parkettes, what we would do in addition to commemorate Plains Road, and as well the fact that we are retaining and restoring a heritage house on the property as well. If I can recall back to those days, I think that formed part of the discussion as well. We will likely, spend, we have already spent, $500,000 rehabilitating that structure right now. So I think that was part of the context.
Okay, I understand. I'll have a comment about that, but I see my time is up. I'll cue back in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm pleased what you've done with the Heritage House. I'm pleased to see, and it's even nice to see you go back to the name Wollaston to recognize the subdivision. My concern, however, is with this new concept, which isn't really innovative, or it's quite innovative, but I've seen similar things in our region in the past, okay? And and it sounds great, and I hope it can work. Just about that, would everyone there in that picture be paying condo fees for the parks?
That's right. So the plan is that every residential unit would contribute to the fund. I mean, through their condominium.
Yeah. Have you tried this out, or?
No, this is for Schlegel's. This is the first development where we are looking at doing this. We have, I think, as you said, it's somewhat innovative, but it's not unprecedented either.
No.
So we've looked at other models, and our builders, Heathwood Homes and Fusion Homes, two award-winning builders, are both very supportive of this. They see it as a very positive feature. And so, with builders behind you who are going to be selling these homes, we think it will be successful.
Yeah, I'm just concerned what happens 50 years down the road. I've seen it, like up in Waterloo, Keats Way, I think it was, there was Major Holdings, who were developers here. Mm-hmm. They've long since disappeared, and they looked after, they owned the entranceway into that, and now they've gone, and now nobody's sure who owns it and who's looking after it. I have an example in the ward that I represent, Deer Ridge Drive. At the beginning of that, as you go into Deer Ridge Drive, there's a neighborhood association that did this 25 years ago now, and now it's a burden. It's a burden for that neighborhood association, and they're trying to get rid of it. So, and I mean, these are the problems that come down the road later on. And like now, you say this is going to be available for public use. Well, really, the public will probably come from that area here. I live a bit of a ways from there. I'm probably not going to be coming there to use your parks, right? It's going to be semi-public, really. Like if you just stated that it won't be organized public, but it'll be for that neighborhood. Do you intend, the ownership will remain with you? Will there be taxes on the property?
I'll take an attempt at clarifying that. The condo corporations, there might be a half dozen condos in the development, they will control a private company, Features Company we'll call it. So Features Company will not be controlled or owned by Schlegel. It will be owned by the condominium. So the residents will control that organization, that company, if you will, and that company will contract with a property management company to manage the affairs. That company will have a reserve fund so that there are funds available for upkeep in the future. The plan, and this has been the beginnings of it discussed with staff already, it's fairly well established so that entrance features and things like that, while they look great at the beginning of development, once the developer is gone from the scene, they may fall into disrepair or unkept. We see this as the solution, and there is an exit strategy if in some point in the future the city is not happy with the arrangement. There's an exit strategy that everything reverts back to city ownership. But we think that it's designed for success, and it will be successful. If you look at Westminster Woods in Guelph, the fees for those residents have not changed from the day that structure was set up in Guelph. We're proposing doing it a little bit differently because that was established in the early 90s. So there's some different structures to set it up, but it's basically the same principle. And we think the fees will stay constant.
I wish you luck. I'm skeptical. I have a daughter that lives in Waterloo. They have the same setup on a swimming pool, and they pay, but it's not public. It's private. They have full control of it. So the minute you open it up to public, things start to change around, and over time things change. So I think it's you have to try these things. I wish you luck. I'm just skeptical from my experience of seeing what has happened. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Yeah, I also am skeptical about this privately owned park arrangement. I'm just wondering if the Schlegel Group had considered finding ways to to see whether or not they might have a trust that everybody who buys the building that in the development invests in, and then it could be an in perpetuity type of a fund that could come and could be used for an annual fee. They could just draw from it every year. Was that ever something that they considered, or?
So, Mr. Chairman, so it will function somewhat that way. So with condominiums, there is a reserve fund, and reserve funds are invested. Mm-hmm. And that's what's anticipated will occur while the trust fund or the reserve fund is built up for ongoing maintenance. So, but typically taxpayers pay and expect that the city will be looking after their neighborhood parks and their citywide parks, and I'm just trying to understand the public-facing messages for the people buying in this area. How is that going to be sold to them?
And I think this is where the interest from our building companies has been very important to us, because they're going to be the people that are interfacing with the potential buyers. I mean, everyone who buys, it's a brand new community, so it's not like this is being imposed on an established neighborhood. Everybody who buys here knows what they're buying into. There'll be full disclosure on what the costs are, what the features are that you're receiving for those dollars. Okay. And
so the multiplex units, are they also like condos owned outright? Is everything owned outright, or are any of them rentals?
So I'll call it the low-rise area of the neighborhood is, we see ownership on all of those lands. The 26 acres of mixed use, which is along Fisher-Hallman, we have discussed, those higher density buildings being rental, but we haven't brought forward any site plan application yet, but that is something that Schlegel has been looking at, doing those as rental buildings in that area.
So would the privately owned parks also be accessible to the individuals who rent on those?
The parks will be accessible to everyone and anyone, and they will be accessible to people who do
Sure.
not live in this neighborhood either.
Okay, so what I meant to ask is, will they be expected to pay into condo fees when they're renting in those units?
So if it's a rental, I guess they would be paying a rental fee. So whether or not that's incorporated, haven't even crossed
Haven't gotten there
that
yet. Okay,
bridge
that's
yet,
fine.
yeah.
I don't, so then the second concern that I just was trying to understand better is this piece about the driveway access. How many cars will be able to fit in the driveways of the typical low-rise residential homes? Is the drive? So I guess the other question is, maybe the other way to put it is, if I'm reading correctly, a lot of the driveways are going to be 6 meters long, which is really, you can't fit 2 cars on that.
All of the singles will be double car driveways, so potential for 4 parking spaces. But 6 meters is the standard for the city of Kitchener.
Standard for
the city of Kitchener. So a 6 meter setback, driveway length, that's the standard in Kitchener. So we're meeting the standard.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So going back to my questions, I was on 3-64 when you were talking about some noise abatement, and so I wondered when that was. That will be along Fisher-Hallman. Will it be along any other? Like, it's hard to see from this picture where the roads are. Do you have one that's better than this?
Just the plan of subdivision.
Okay, that's probably even better, actually. So Fisher-Hallman would be on the left-hand side of this.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And what is on the top? Is it?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to orient myself. Where is your noise abatement wall going to be? On Huron as well?
And so, Councillor Fernandez, we did a noise, and rather than do rear lotting and a noise wall rear of those houses all along Huron, what we were doing was side lot and do window streets. So it will be open facades to all the houses, but we are able to meet the noise in the outdoor living space, so to the rear of those houses that will side on to Huron. So rather than have a noise wall, which is on the opposite side, of course, on Huron.
Okay, I can get that in my head. Thank you. Just a quick question around this lot, because I think that's on Tartan, and now we've a partnership with the school board for a community center. Will you be building in some kind, making sure that we're not stuck with parking, on both sides of the street? Will you build some of it into, this is supposed to be a very walkable community, to try and encourage people to walk to the community center? Will you be building that in terms of rowings and that kind of stuff, so we don't have to come afterwards and do it?
There's been a lot of deliberation about cycling, physical lane widths, trails throughout the neighborhood and so on in the last number of months with staff. Just to clarify, this is not the school where the community center is proposed to be co-located. That's just down Avenue to the east in the Prime Land subdivision, so it's just off the right-hand side, immediate right-hand side of our plan. So this is a Catholic elementary school.
All right, thank you for that clarification.
There's good trail connections and connectivity to the site.
Okay. And last questions I have for you guys would be around the conservation plan, R676. There was an email from Drake on May 10th that talks about a conservation plan. Has that been done? Are we completely up to the standards that our heritage staff would have put out for this development?
Yes, if I may say, I think we were always, at the standards that heritage staff were looking for. It was sort of a disconnect between the long time ago that this plan was first draft approved and interim mitigation measures for the homeland. In fact, as the conservation plan was being updated, we were also actually doing restoration work on the house. So it's once again out of date because most of the work committed in the conservation plan is complete. But yes, the conservation plan is in place. Ms. Wade is satisfied with it. Our credit is posted and so on.
Okay, great. We have an opportunity for questions of staff because it was one.
You're first in line.
Okay.
So you must see click.
Okay, I'll just stay clicked in. So thank you, gentlemen. My question is the one that I had posed originally related to the variances and the sort of the pair on page 3-5.
Yeah. So through your the reason that there's a recommendation with respect to the variances is that we hadn't had, when I drafted this report, and that's why there's also a revised bylaw before you, we hadn't had the opportunity to look at all the lots in the subdivision on a site-specific basis, based on the building plan, based on that. And so for the overall subdivision, we knew that what we had originally recommended at 7 meters was appropriate. However, we knew that on a much more detailed fine-grained scale, we could probably reduce that based on further justification. And so the applicants were actually able to provide that justification for all the corner lots in the entire subdivision, and that was reviewed and approved as of noon today, which is why you have the revised bylaw that speaks to the 6-meter setback. And so that's why we were anticipating the variances. Now, the reason it's in this report is because of some of the recent changes to the Planning Act. And so what the new Planning Act regulations require is that whenever there's a site-specific zone change, there's the Planning Act has a 2-year moratorium on variances, on minor variances, unless council deems it appropriate to approve them. Now, my understanding, and Della may want to step in, but my understanding is that moving forward, we feel it is appropriate to allow variances, especially when it's a large-scale project like this. There's always circumstances that could come up within 2 years where we miss something, or it's appropriate to slightly revise a rear setback or a side lot line. We wouldn't want to encumber future property owners when they move in and then they can't, variances come up for all sorts of reasons. So we would recommend in any case leaving this recommendation in place that variances are permitted within 2 years. Otherwise, nobody in this entire 66 hectares would be permitted to make a variance for 2 years. So it came about as a result of the driveway setbacks, but just more broadly speaking, moving forward, my understanding is it'll be incorporated into the zoning recommendations of all zone change, or most zone changes.
Is that something that's going to be communicated to the residents as they purchase their homes, that their neighbor could go for a variance right next door to them?
Sorry.
Ms. Ross.
Through you, Chair. I don't know if it'll be, made readily available that way. It'll just be sort of standard process that, if a variance is required, the application could be made. There would be circulation to neighbors. My understanding of the Planning Act changes is the moratorium on variances would be for more site-specific zone changes, where we've done a study. It's on an individual lot or a smaller lot, and we wouldn't want to see changes to that, right after we've gone through this process with council. But as Katie said, for larger areas, larger developments, there may be things that we don't foresee and that we would want to consider. But again, it is an application to the Committee of Adjustment. It's not necessarily an approval. It's an application that would go through a review process.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation. Councillor Marsh raised a bit of a red flag with me with regard to the 6-meter driveways, which is only 8. I still go to Imperial every once in a while to get that in my head. It's 18 feet. Now, that's quite dense in a very dense development. Quite tight.
So through you, I'm not sure if this answers your question. The city standard parking stall length in a commercial development or any development is 5.5 meters, and that accommodates for a standard vehicle size, and that's why we allow 6 meters for a driveway length between a house, so effectively between the door of the garage when the garage is closed and the sidewalk, so that you can accommodate a full-size vehicle, whether that's a van or a pickup truck, without it overhanging the sidewalk. So that's why we have the 6 meters, and that's just based on the size, the standard size of vehicles. Many vehicles are much smaller than that. They're like 4.5 meters or something like that. But that accommodates a full-size vehicle. That's the purpose of the 6-meter setback for the driveway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your responses.
Councillor Marsh.
Thanks for that clarification, Katie. I'm trying to understand, though, because the applicant was saying that it's a 2-car driveway, but the 6 meters accommodates about 1 vehicle with a buffer. So are they double wide, or is the 2-car implying that 1 car goes in the garage?
Yeah, through you, that's exactly right. There would be, in most cases, the single detached dwellings would have a garage. The garage is set back 6 meters, so you have 1 parking stall inside the garage, 1 on the driveway in front of the garage. And because most of them are double-car driveways and double-car garages, you would have 4 parking stalls.
I see. Okay, thanks. And then the word street line means when you refer to a certain setback from the street line, you're referring to the sidewalk line, not the actual street. Is that right?
Through you, effectively it's the sidewalk, it's the property line. Usually the sidewalk is set about 30 centimeters off the property line.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
We have no further questions, comments. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I'm prepared to move the recommendation at, I guess it's the appropriate time now to move it and just make a couple comments. I think that we still have work to do when it comes to the concerns around the Yog Temple's concerns, but those are really, I think, outside of the scope of what we're dealing with today with regards to Plains Road and Fisher-Hallman Road and the alignment, and I think a lot of that's going to have to come through the regional project. So I think that we need to continue to address those. But outside of that, I'm very proud to have the Wollaston neighborhood in Ward 5. I was hesitant on the concept at first, but I believe that it'll work after having conversations with both staff and with the developer. We're getting enhanced park features that we don't necessarily have anywhere else in the community, and we aren't even having to pay for them. And I think that's a win. We're getting a preserved heritage home in this area and in this subdivision, and that's a win. Plains Road commemoration goes above and beyond anything I've seen in the city with roadway markers that
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go to start back at Plains Road. The Plains Road commemoration is better than anything I've ever seen, with roadway markings at the intersection and the parkettes, and I think that's a huge win. Residents love the concept of the Williamsburg Town Center, and this area is only going to learn and improve on what that concept has, and that's a win. So I think that moving this forward is something that's unique for our community, and I think that we need to just continue to proceed forward because I think it's really going to work in this area. And so I thank staff and I thank the developer for bringing this forward.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So this is, and I really apologize for missing the presentation because I'm sure I'm asking questions that you probably spoke to. And the pictures are showing a very interesting and unique development, and especially around the public parks and public access, private parks with public access. I counted the units, and it's really an intense development. And yes, that's what the provincial policy is asking us to do as we preserve some farmland, but of course this was farmland at some point in time too. I am a little bit worried about the frontages, the ability for people to have visitor parking, because we see that in some parts of my neighborhoods as well, where there's not enough frontage for a car to park in the front, and if you've only got a single driveway, a 6-meter driveway, and your garage is chock-a-block full of stuff, we're going to see some issues in the future. But you know what? That's the council of the day to deal with. Maybe not today. I did question around the developer contribution around the commemoration cost sharing schedule, and you know, Mr. Benders suggested that it was because you're doing a renovation on the Heritage House, but rightly so. I think, you know, it's a heritage property. You knew that way back when. So I think as you move forward through this development, should your contributions increase a little bit, I think that the community and the city at large would be very appreciative of those kind of contributions. I'll be interested to see how this all plays out. I think it's going to be, there's a little bit of a concern for me around people trying to get from this development to the park. I should have probably asked a question around how do you see that crossover happening, but hopefully when the region widens Fisher-Hallman, some of those considerations will happen. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. This is, I'm not sure I've seen a development that's a subdivision that looks more complete than this one. It took me, I'll be honest, took me a while to wrap my head around the, I don't really like saying the word private park concept because it is open to the public, but I don't really see any risks, being any different than any other condominium. I just sort of tend to think of that whole process as, instead of it being a tower that's condominiumized, it's spread out under the same rules and conditions. And I think it does bring a different offering to our community. And the key here is that, as was stated by the delegation, no one lives there yet. So if it's something that you're not comfortable with, you don't move there. I think they're targeting a very specific demographic. In terms of, so yeah, I'm very happy to support this, and it's going to be fascinating to see it develop and as this model, and see if this sort of model catches on elsewhere. In terms of the developers' contributions, I would have to point out that they did make a very significant multi-million-dollar contribution in terms of the park that is across the street here. So I think that does need to be acknowledged, and I wouldn't be looking for them in the near term to be contributing anything further than that.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ryan. And I just want to thank the Schlegel Group for this project. It's great to have an amazing park that the whole public can use. But yes, the neighbors will probably be the ones that use it the most. But to go over and above like you're planning on doing, I think is fantastic. Thanks for the acknowledgement and preservation of the heritage in this. You know, seeing the Schlegel developments, whether it's Williamsburg or the care homes, they're always done with such care and such pride. So it gives me a lot of assurance that this is going to be an amazing development as well.
Thank you. Mayor Urbanovic.
And thank you very much. And just to further add to my comments from earlier, thank you as well for this project. I think it is, as Councillor Davies said, one of the more complete projects that's been brought before us. And in particular, as I said earlier, one of the things that stands out for me is this idea that the park is going to be developed at the front end of development as opposed to the back end. And that's one of the things that we often hear about the most as people move into new subdivisions, is their frustration with the fact that they're there and they're waiting and they're waiting.
and then we ultimately get to the park being built. I'm really excited about this concept. I think it builds on something we've experimented with in other areas, but really takes it to the next level. And I think it'll provide for an enhanced amenity that, yes, will be primarily for the benefit of people in that neighborhood, but will ultimately be for the benefit of the whole community. And that's exciting, and I think there'll be lessons learned from this as we go forward that I think perhaps might be applicable in other developments in the future, which benefits both those residents and helps out the community overall. So thank you very much.
I see no further comments, so I will make my comments. You guys always seem to amaze me. Every time you come with an application, you seem to raise the bar. When it started off with Williamsburg, that community, and all I hear is great praise from many residents I know that live in that area. They love that community, and what you've learned from there now you are applying to the Wollaston. If that's Wollaston, right? Wollaston, sorry. Community, and I think no doubt it's going to be another award-winning design, and I have no doubt with the commitment that your organization has to this community and the amount of dollars that you've committed to this community, that this project will be a success. And it's called to question, recorded vote. Polls are open. Okay. It's voted unanimously. And I think that's it. That's it for our Planning and Strategic Initiative Committee. Thank you. Have a good evening.